Light. Good.
AAA respond to those calls?
They say they're comparable. Shoulder is just, to me, I've never had a knee done.
Okay, I think we're up. Good morning, everyone.
Guess I learned something.
Okay, are we on? Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I see a face that I recognize. Okay, we are here for Monday, July 29th workshop. The agenda is online as well as, I don't know if we're going to show it. First, we are going to, I'm on the wrong one, excuse me 1 second, not on the workshop. Okay, our first order of business is SESIR. How do you say? SESIR?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't want to pronounce it incorrectly. So first,
School Environmental Safety Incident Reporting.
okay, and you do realize that you don't have it on your thing. That's okay. All right, and to present the SESIR information will be Dr. Pete Bohatch and his entourage, who he will introduce.
Thank you. Good morning. Happy Monday, board members, Dr. Atkins. Not sure who I should introduce first, so I think I'm going to go with who has the most gray. So looking up here.
It's a tough call, too.
It's white. All right, my bad. So Dana, first up from Cape Coral PD, we got Dana Costin. Welcome, Dana.
Good morning.
And Commander Mike Miller from the Lee County Sheriff's Office.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here, gentlemen. Okay, Chuck, Chuck Bradley in the back will be controlling the PowerPoint. So first slide, 30 minutes, so we're going to run through this quickly. Next up, Chuck. Okay, we're going to talk about SESIR today. Those are the first 21 offenses in the Code of Conduct, are SESIR offenses. These are offenses that are required, that we are required to report to the state. The state also recommends that we consult with law enforcement. So whenever a student commits one of these offenses, we are expected to have a conversation with the SRO. Let me give you an example. There could be a, let's pick one of those up there, vandalism. Let's say that there was some vandalism in a school restroom. It's expected that administration meet with the SRO to talk about what do we got here. Well, it's minor. There was some scribbling on a stall. What do we do here? And normally the school would handle it. On the other extreme, it could be that we have thousands of dollars worth of damage where law enforcement may get involved. So it's a conversation between administration and law enforcement. Top 21, those are the big 21. Expected to consult. Okay, next up.
Can I ask a question?
You can.
Go back. What is the difference between battery, physical attack, and fighting?
Great question. I'm going to address that later, but I can hit it now if you want.
No, if
Okay.
it's coming up later, that's
It
fine.
is. All right. All right. These may not need to consult with law enforcement. Bullying, fighting, harassment, sexual harassment, and tobacco. Those are the big 26, the first 26 in the Code of Conduct. Okay. SESIRs, we must report. And we try to tell the principals this isn't about got you. You must report. In fact, recent legislation, a lot of districts don't report or don't report accurately. There's some stiff penalties towards districts for districts who don't report. All right, next up. All right, there's the reported to law enforcement. And I'll let them jump in if I need some help here. But consulting and reporting. When we report, case number, an arrest, civil citation, jump in if you want.
Oh, it's accurate.
Okay, so, and you'll see in a minute the state average versus Lee County's average right there, so. All right, Chuck, next up. All right, there's the behavior triangle. Of course, law enforcement at the bottom. We really don't want law enforcement involved in the day-to-day business of school discipline. The normal referral process, meeting with the students. Absolute, last case, we want law enforcement involved. All right, next up. All right, there's the state. This, once again, folks, this is 17-18. Hello, Mrs. Giovanelli. So last year's data, over 71,000 SESIR incidents were recorded in the state of Florida. 33%, there was an action that was taken, okay, reported to law enforcement. All right, there it is there. Case number, report, affidavit, civil citation, or arrest. Sir, you want to come on up? Welcome. All right, everybody, this is Sergeant Lamar Campbell from Fort Myers PD.
Good morning.
Welcome, Sergeant. All right, next slide. Okay, here's a breakdown related to expected to consult versus may not need. So if you look at the expected to consult, better than half were reported to law enforcement. 52% of SESIRs where administration was expected to consult with the SRO resulted in a report, all right? And then the next slide, or not, that may not need, you're looking at 12%. All right, next up, Chuck.
So how do we know that those expected to consults were resulted in actual consultations?
Well, it's part of the report. So the state tracks, we report on what they call the DSA district support application, where when we enter it in, it'll ask, was it reported to law enforcement? So there's a drop-down, report to law, and the state gets that data right there, and so.
Well, but there's a difference between a report to law enforcement and a consultation with law enforcement, because a consultation doesn't necessarily result in a report.
No, it's a great question, and consultation isn't part of the drop-down for the DSA. We strictly reported to law enforcement. We don't, consultation goes on all day, every day when you're dealing with student discipline. So reporting is what they get, okay?
Okay, but how do I, as a board member, know that consultation is taking place in a school?
Well, we would trust that the relationship is there, and that's a great question. You guys want to jump in? Dana, you talked about meeting with principals at the start of the school year.
Well, part of what we do in Cape Coral anyway is we meet with the principals on a regular basis. The school SRO is expected to maintain a collegial working relationship with their administration. The school resource officers, supervisors meet with the principals on a regular basis, and I myself meet with the principals on a regular, ongoing basis as well. We encourage that consultation, that ongoing dialogue with their SRO, and we always say, when in doubt, please involve us. It may not result in an official law enforcement action, but it never hurts to run something by the SRO as a matter of course. As far as the school's policy on when principals will consult, that's going to be more trusting the principal to do what you would expect of them to do in their school.
Is there some type of a statutory, ruling or policy that you have to report anything on the 21?
No, we're expected to consult. Now you're asking about the reporting. I think we're case by case.
Well, I think that we're getting a little hung up on the word consult versus report.
Yeah.
It's all consultation. Whether or not a police report is done is going to depend on the severity of the incident and the specific circumstances of that particular incident.
So then, where does police discretion enter into that when it comes to that reporting?
If it's something that we are mandated by law to take a report on, there is no discretion.
Okay.
If it's a situation, like we'll take, for instance, student conflict. You may have a shoving match in a hallway. Technically, if somebody places their hands on another person against their will, it's battery by law. Technically.
Right.
You involve the school resource officer, technically they can go ahead with the battery investigation. Is that necessarily the most appropriate step? It's going to depend on the circumstances, case by case.
Dana, let me jump in. So that situation, putting your hands on each other, code of conduct could be a pure conflict.
Right.
Okay, rather than, by law, that's a battery. Per the code of conduct, that would be a pure conflict.
So then that leads me to the question about what consideration is given to the age of the child, and how much do we consider those children who have special needs, maybe autism or other special needs. Because right now we have a lot of children whose behavior is not acceptable based on the code of conduct. However, they are sometimes impaired with substance-affected situations, trauma. So I'm just wondering about that. And the reason I'm asking that question is because just this weekend I heard a story about a 6-year-old who was Baker acted, taken in handcuffs, is being raised by the grandparents. And so my other question then goes, what really happens when that report is made and when an arrest or a Baker Act is done? Because I don't think we know the whole story, and I think that we need to know the whole story before we support some of this. So, I mean, there's all those variables that enter into it.
There are.
Yeah, okay.
Every situation is unique, just like you said. No two are alike, and we
Right.
definitely take that. The student's mental health their well-being and age. It's a big factor in a lot of our decision-making, but we do that collectively with the school administration and the principals.
Okay, Chuck, next slide. Okay, these are the top 10 districts in the state of Florida with the highest SESIR incidents. Lee County ranked 9th in 17-18. We reported 27%. All right, we reported 27%. State average was 33, so below the state average. All right, next up, Chuck. All right, these are the incidents by type. If you look at the top 4, fighting, drugs, physical attack, and tobacco. I anticipate tobacco, we're gonna see, remember this is 17-18, a big spike, coming up into, from last year, 18-19.
I'm sorry, I have a question on the last slide. Why does, for example, Polk County report almost all of their total incidents?
It's a great question. Why does Duval County only report 8?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
you look at that, I'm scratching my head, going, what the heck's going on here? So I think somewhere in the middle needs to be the number, and the state average is 33, and maybe I can reach out to some of my colleagues over in Duval, but to me, that seems pretty
Steep.
I don't even know the word I want to use there, but 8% in a large school district
Yeah.
reporting with all the drugs and violence and all that exists. So, but there we are.
Okay.
All right, Chuck, next slide. All right, there's a graphic representation there. So once again, the top 10 for the state: fighting, physical attack, tobacco, and then drugs. Next up, Chuck. Okay, Ms. Petrie, can I answer your question? So,
Next up, Chuck.
yeah, next up, Chuck. Say it 3 times real fast. But it's a Monday morning. So, all right, so there's your batteries. The difference between battery and physical attack, per the code of conduct, not in their world. So battery requires significant bodily injury. So if a school codes battery as somebody getting punched in the head or pushed in a hallway, we've got to train the principals that wasn't a battery, all right? They've got to be in the clinic, maybe there was some blood, EMS arrived on the scene, significant. All right, physical attack, hit you in the head with a book, pushed you over a desk, so that's the difference right there. Happy to report, the state of Florida, 100% of batteries were reported to law enforcement, which means something happened. There was a civil citation, an arrest, something happened there. All right, physical attack, you're looking at only 9% there was actually an action, all right? And then fighting on the right, 9% were, actually there was a case number or an arrest made on fighting. Okay, next up. Fighting, Lee County ranked 8th with 4% reporting. All right, Chuck, next up. Battery, Lee County in at number 10, 66 with 100% reported to law enforcement. All right, next up. All right, weapons, we didn't make the top 10. Happy to report. Next up. All right, interesting data here. And I don't know if you had a chance to, Ms. Fisher sent out a TED Talk with TJ, a social worker. I forget what state he was from, but really the primary focus of his message was that a lot of students are being suspended out of school for nonviolent offenses. So if you look at the data here, this was our elementary from last year. The top 5 offenses are non-SESIR and nonviolent. So you're looking at disruptive behavior, peer conflict, safety, insubordination, other rule. Okay. Next up, we'll go to middle school.
What is a safety violation?
Safety, that's like a catch-all. It could be, I'll give you some examples because I deal with this stuff every day. Student took a paper clip and put it into an outlet. Student sprayed hairspray into somebody's eyes.
The reason I ask is because K-5 for us, disruptive behavior is declining, peer conflict is declining, but safety violations are increasing. So one of the questions you ask when you look at this data is what accomplished the reductions and what is this with safety violations? Is this new reporting? Is it, has it been underreported? What's?
I don't have the answer to that. That's a great question. I'd have to dig down and really look and analyze, each incident by school to see where it was occurring. What grade level? Could have been kindergarten or 5th grade or,
Yeah.
yeah, it's good stuff that we can get for you. So, good to see some decreases there, but still, in my opinion, alarming that, go back to the elementary, that we have a significant number of kindergarten students being sent home for non-violent behaviors. Okay, and that's going to be part of our work this year moving forward. All right, next up at middle, same trend. You're looking at 5 out of the top 6 were non-SESIR. And then high school is next up, and we had 4 out of the top 6. See a trend here, folks? All right, next slide. All right, overall K-12 OSS by the numbers. 5 out of the top 6 were non-SESIR, non-violent. Next slide, Chuck. And then K-12 total number of students with a SESIR incident, with tobacco leading the way. No surprise, I anticipate last school year that's really, we've seen a significant spike there, and that's going to continue to grow. The gentleman across the room will probably tell you that it has hit epidemic proportions, you know, in the school district and what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. All right, next up. Okay, try to go as quickly as possible. So, questions for the group?
I have one. Anyone else have questions first? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't look up. I apologize. Ms.
Yeah,
Morgan?
so I guess my question is, I don't know if it's a question or a comment. I sort of feel like, and this presentation, the next presentation is a data dump on the board. And we've got a lot of information about the state, no comparables for the most part with Lee County. So we don't know where we stand relative to state statistics. We aren't talking about the kinds of questions I asked, like, you know, what's declining, what's increasing, what's the same, what have we done in the schools to impact these things, and in areas where there are increases in either numbers of students or incidents. Actually, I'm getting into the next report. What are we doing to address those particular things? So I guess I'm looking for, in a workshop, not all the information, not the data. I'm looking for an analysis of the data relative to us doing our job in questioning the superintendent and staff about how we are responding to the data we've got. So it's not a question, it's just a comment.
I think I can address part of your question there, or comment, that part of my new role is to be going into schools. The data, to me, looking at it and reviewing it over the last couple of months, has been significant and aha for me to see that most of the out-of-school suspensions are related to non-violent offenses, which in my opinion, bringing Chuck Bradley in, Jared Eady in with the cultural diversity training, these, in my opinion, are offenses that we can coach.
Yeah, and that's exactly my question. Why aren't we here talking about that?
Yeah, the plan.
Yeah, so
Proactive.
you've noticed this over the last few months, that
Right.
this is a problem. So to me, when you come to a workshop with the board, what you should be saying is, this is what I took from the data, and here is what we're talking about doing. And so that's, again, and then I'll stop. That was my second round.
I think Ms. Patrica was next.
I have a comment first. Thank you very much to our law enforcement partners. We could not do this without you. And I'm just very, very grateful that you're in our schools and you're helping our kids, so thank you. I don't have much confidence based on the data that I got today that we are reporting what we're supposed to be reporting. I'm not saying that we're not, but I also have no way of knowing whether principals are exercising discretion to not even consult with law enforcement when they should be. That's data that I really want to have to make sure that we're in compliance, and perhaps that will come from the audit that you're doing. I don't know, but that's a huge question that's unanswered for me today, and I think that was a big problem in Broward, and that continues to be a big issue over there, and I want to make sure that we're not doing that. So that's my question/comment.
Ms. Giovanelli?
I was just going to say, I agree with Ms. Morgan. I think that we have to have a plan. I mean, because we need to hear from the experts on the plan, because we only need, we don't have that expertise. So I think that the plan is probably one of the most important, because obviously you have the data to work with. So I think that that's really important. And I appreciate everything that they do in the schools. So SROs are very important. So I think that the collaboration is really going to be key to the success of our children. So thank you for that.
So just to, well, go ahead.
No,
I'm
go
just
ahead.
waiting on all the board member comments.
Okay.
and I'll
Okay, so I
have a
just
few words I'd
want
like
to say that over the last 2 years, I think that we have been doing a lot of planning, and I would defer to Ms. Brooks and Mr. Bradley, but we have a mental health plan, we have a positive prevention plan. But my comment will be that I'm concerned that we don't have consistent implementation across the district. And so my next question would be then, what is the training that our administrators are receiving relative to those plans and implementing them? I have had staff members comment to me that they are members of the mental health plan or the safety team or the safety and security team, but then they are advised not to report to law enforcement, and that they, you know what I mean, that the team is not really doing what is prescribed. So how do we get to the reality of that? I mean, and that is the reality. And this is not a criticism of anybody, because I think different people have different levels of perceptions and understanding about this. But it's a serious problem, and we have a lot of children who are further traumatized and maybe not given the help that is the intent that we have when we create these plans and train these teams. So that's, you know, I just don't know the answer to that, and I think that that's a very general problem, is that, you know, different strokes for different folks, and we really can't have that when it comes to this kind of issue, because it could, in some cases, be a life or death matter, as we've seen in other places across the state.
Your comment as to the training, and then I'll talk about the rest of
Yeah,
it.
Chuck, you want to jump in on the PBIS? And I don't know if I see Mr. Eady, but.
Sure. Yep, I got a microphone. So we are continuing to implement PBIS training. We've added 22 schools over the last year to our PBIS Level 1. We've now begun to also progress in providing PBIS Level 2 and working with schools to integrate social emotional learning with their PBIS program. This year, we're also going to reinvigorate the restorative practices, alternatives to suspension piece. And that's where we see the trends leading. I've been doing some research on the UCLA Civil Rights Project and the use of restorative practices and how they have reduced their suspension rates through using those strategies. So we are in the process of reinvigorating that training, bringing that back to our schools. We're looking at pieces of information. The video that Jeff sent to you, I believe you sent that out, Dr. Spiro, is a great conversation piece to begin that conversation around how do we reduce suspension and at the same time make our schools safer for all kids. So that's the core of our plan going forward. A lot of technical assistance and improving the consistency of practice with those pieces. And then I'll speak for Jared Eady for just a minute. Also bringing in that cultural sensitive instruction, culturally responsive, and having those deep conversations around implicit bias. What do we know about working with students from different sectors of society, from poverty, from social isolation, from a variety of factors that impact our classrooms every day.
I have well, go ahead. I have a couple of questions that are kind of specifics of that.
Okay. One of the things that we did when we looked at this data from this past year is I really felt that in order to get the consistency that we needed to in this district, we have to inspect what we expect. And so we did some significant restructuring this year. That's why you now have 4 executive directors, so that those 4 executive directors can focus on a much smaller group of schools. And then when you're doing things like learning walks, you know, we need to adjust how we do those so that we can really focus where we have more of a need. I think last year there was a broader focus. I think this year that needs to be narrowed somewhat, so we're making sure that we're getting compliance on these areas where we're expecting to see something, and we need to monitor to make sure that that is indeed happening. I have changed Dr. Bohatch's role and to include a district vehicle, and the purpose of that is to help with the monitoring of all of this by making visits to schools, and those are not always going to be announced visits. And you're looking for things like compliance with what we expect as it relates to school safety. An example would be, I want to know as the superintendent that School X is making sure that they're in compliance with what we're doing in a hallway. You know, everybody's at their door. Cafeteria, bus ramp. All of this stuff is important, but I have found to get consistent practice, you're going to have to monitor. Just like a school principal doesn't go out into the same spot every day at hall change, they have to be roaming, so you never know where they're going to be. If you're at the same spot, if you just walk outside your office into the main hallway, if that's where principal so-and-so is on a daily basis, I can guarantee you that the teachers are not at their classroom doors, and therefore you're going to have more fights than you need to have. But I do believe that we do have some inconsistencies across the district, and therefore we have needed to make these changes in our structure to be able to monitor our expectations on a greater basis. The other thing that we have done with our safety and security department, that there are additional personnel in that department that we added last year that have to go out and monitor our safety and security compliance, to include charter schools, to make sure that they're in compliance. And the last piece, you referred to the audit. I asked some time ago for Mr. Williams to get with Bob Brown to audit our compliance with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and everything that goes with it. Right. Because the grand jury has been, convened, and I think that the state of Florida is very serious about it. We are certainly serious about it. I think if you ask Mr. Pratt, he knows that I'm very, very concerned that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we're complying with the law, to include accurately reporting. The final thing that I'll have to say that I hope that comes out of this is, we've worked with the NAACP on some of those disparity issues that we are dealing with. And part of what we need to do there, I think, is improve what we can do as it relates to alternatives to suspension. But just doing a alternative suspension program to reduce your suspension numbers is doesn't work. You have to do something that actually makes a difference in the child's behavior. And so when we're implementing ATS programs, we need to make sure we're doing them properly. That's, again, part of what Dr. Bohatch's role. I don't want glorified timeout rooms. That doesn't change behavior. If you're going to do an alternative suspension program, you need to do an alternative suspension program. If you're going to implement restorative practices, you have to do it in a way that's meaningful, not in a way that's just avoiding reporting of the numbers, because, again, that doesn't change behavior. True restorative practices is supposed to actually help change the behavior, not mask numbers. I'm not interested in masking numbers. We're interested in changing the behavior. Mm-hmm. If you have an effective ATS program, you can change behavior, you can improve attendance, and you can improve academic achievement. I've done it personally. I've seen other school principals do it. We need to spread that across the district. That's why you have additional staff to help with that.
Okay. I have a couple of questions, and especially I also want to say thank you to you gentlemen for showing up today. These questions will probably have a lot to do with you as far as the answers. First, why are we arresting students for juuling?
Well, I can answer pretty simply. Those juuling and those vapes, most of them, a lot of them, contain liquid THC. Liquid THC is a felony under Florida state statute. That's the reason they're going to jail for that. They're not going to jail for a tobacco product.
Right, okay. And and some of these questions are from community members that have asked me to say this. Why are we arresting elementary students for disruption on campus?
To my knowledge, I'm not sure we did last year. I don't know that for a fact. I don't know. I can't recall a specific incident that we were involved in with elementary.
Yeah, there were a couple.
Were there a couple?
Mm-hmm.
lot of it has to do with the situation. And if we're able to show that there's some intent, and depending on the severity of the situation, it is possible. But a lot of it has to do with just discretion, case by case.
Okay.
Can I add, K-5 doesn't always indicate the age of the child or the physical size or capabilities of the child. So I think that if we looked at it on a case-by-case basis, it might make more sense. But I know that we have some older, rather physically mature kids in K-5.
I've come across kids that were arrested that brought weapons to school.
There was one.
They knew the intent, what they planned on doing with that weapon. That's a case where, we likely would arrest.
Okay.
But it's all case by case.
Okay. What involvement should the school resource officer have in the day-to-day student discipline in your, observation or your thoughts?
I'd say none. We don't get involved with student discipline at all.
As a matter of our policy, we specifically say the SRO should avoid writing referrals for school rule violations. We want to maintain a delineation of the role of the officer and the role of the administration. We are there to enforce state statute. School officials are there to enforce school rules. While certainly our SROs will assist if they see something going on, tell kids, stop running, minor stuff like that. We don't want to cloud that or have a situation where we create a potential for a challenge in a criminal case, if there is one, where we are enforcing school rule violations or blurring that line between the administrative and the criminal.
Okay. And what type of training is offered to school resource officers related to dealing with students from different ethnic groups? So I know that we as a district are instituting the cultural sensitivity and implicit bias. Do the officers go through the same type of training?
There's in the police academy, there's actually a cultural diversity component in basic law enforcement across the state of Florida. We also conduct our own in-house training for diversity. All of our SROs are also CIT certified, so that we are equipped to deal with not only issues of cultural diversity, but also varying ability levels, dependent on if there's some other factor at play with the students as well.
And LCSO mirrors that same training.
Okay. And finally, should school resource officers be involved in all student searches?
You want to answer it?
Our recommendation is that the SRO should be, if not directly involved, at least present. And the reason for that is if a school administrator is conducting a search on a student, especially if they believe that there are drugs or weapons involved, what that allows us to do is maintain the continuity or the chain of custody of evidence. Too often what can happen is a well-meaning administrator wants to get the search over with and get the kid processed and either turned over to parents or out, then they involve us later on. If the officer doesn't witness the child in possession, then you may have an issue where it can hinder the case. Also, if there's a concern that there may be a weapon involved, and the administrator is concerned about that, they can ask the SRO, this is an administrative search, but we would like you to conduct it because we're afraid that there may be a weapon. And our officers are more than happy to assist in those matters.
Okay, those were my questions I was asked to bring forward. And my comment is, we talk about behavioral change, and I think the behavioral change needs to be across the board for all of us, from us all the way down to everyone in the building, including, that works as an employee in the building. I was concerned, and I had mentioned that the minority discipline numbers had not, really gotten that much better. And the correlation that I saw was and I've asked about this, between academics and discipline. Because having been a teacher, I know that if a student is not getting it, then they're either going to be bullied or they're going to try to create some distraction because they don't want anyone to know that they're not getting it. So there has got to be that correlation between what are we doing for these students in the discipline? Are there levels? Are they level 1s and 2s? And what are we doing to move them up? Because that would probably help between that and mental health to move them out of the discipline numbers.
In fact, Mr. Bradley has prepared a report on students who were recommended for alternative placement on their GPAs. So I think, are you near completion on that?
Okay, thank you. And I've just realized it's 36, so we're a few minutes over this section. Did you have a comment that you needed to make, Ms.?
I had another question, but I'll hold it for later. Yeah.
If you-
Okay,
Go ahead.
so oftentimes when we get to the point of an arrest or a Baker Act, we have an out-of-control student. So my question is, what is the current training that our administrators and staff are having that teach de-escalation? I mean, we used to have CPI training, and everyone took it. We did it in summer sessions, et cetera. So I guess my question is, what is that training? Because oftentimes we can prevent things from getting to that point if we have the skill set and know what to do. So
Okay. Chuck, you want to hit that one?
Get the microphone to cooperate there. So we do provide de-escalation training for schools through SEDNet, and SEDNet is our area regional support network. It's a discretionary project from the state, and they provide specific intervention trainings. And so one of the trainings that they do provide to us is a version of CPI. We're also talking directly with CPI to get a price on what it would take to get local facilitators that could provide the training, because we do see the need to provide that at a greater scale than what SEDNet can provide at this time. The TEACH training also has a de-escalation component, and so there's that piece as well. I do like the CPI. The CPI is a little more robust, but the TEACH training does provide that piece as well. So that is typically provided through Ms. Jessica Duncan's department through the IDEA grant. So, and then we do provide kind of custom versions on site. This last year, we've provided some to Allen Park in particular, and just go in and assess the needs and then come back and provide that specific training that they need.
thank you.
Okay, thank you again for coming and enlightening us and for being here. We appreciate it, and thank you for all that you do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you, gentlemen up there, for your help as well. And we will move on. I'm sure we will have other times to ask questions about this.
Okay, thank you.
So as a follow-up, we'll have Dr. Bohatch provide us a little bit more of analysis of the data and an update as to our action plan this year.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to the agenda review for July 30th action meeting. And to kind of expedite, we have quite a few things on there. If we can go through the sections, and starting out with academic services. Do we have academic services here?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know that they're on. Are they on?
No, they are. Just, you can bend them down a little closer to you. Okay.
Executive services, and I had a question.
I'm sorry?
We skipped executive services, and I had a question.
Oh, okay. I am sorry. Okay.
That's okay. We're approving travel to the Greater Florida Consortium of School Boards, and I'm not sure the utility of our participation in that, given the fact that we've not had a discussion regarding Lee County School District's legislative platform. We, as board members, cannot present anything that we have or have not agreed upon as a board during that meeting on August 15th. So I'm not sure why we're even going at this point.
Well, we're going to gather knowledge about what the consortium has and what their thoughts are as far as legislation as well. I did get your email about that and have not had an opportunity to speak with the superintendent about it. I'm thinking if we can bring it up for good of the order even tomorrow, after the
Special meeting?
the special meeting, if that's a possibility. Is Carol in town? Carol Green, does anyone know?
I didn't hear what you said.
Is Carol Green in town? What we were talking about? Okay, so if it's possible, can we add just a good of the order to that portion, to the special meeting? Thoughts, comments?
It's generally not appropriate to have that kind of a discussion during an action meeting of the board. That would be more of a briefing discussion or a workshop discussion. And I really feel like we're getting behind the 8 ball on this issue. So what is the earliest time that we could schedule a workshop or a briefing on this item?
Okay, like I said, I just received your email, so I would like to get with the superintendent and staff to find out when we can, at the earliest point, put it in there, prior to going to the consortium. So are you suggesting that we not go to the consortium because we don't have our legislative pieces in place?
Yes, that is what I'm suggesting. Because it's not just a matter of learning, it's a matter of representing Lee County and making sure that Lee County's issues are included in that, in the consortium's agenda.
Yes, okay. So, Ms. Morgan, you had to.
No, so I just agree. I think we ought to pull the item and have a meeting. We need to have a meeting about our representation on various committees. Clearly, there is not a common understanding on this board about who does what and speaks for the board and speaks individually at any point in time with respect to any kind of legislation. So I think it's urgent that we have that meeting, and I think this item needs to be pulled until we do.
Okay, let me have, if possible, have an opportunity to get with the superintendent and staff and schedule as soon as possible. We can pull this is there a consensus on pulling this and having a briefing, a workshop or discussion on it prior to going to consortium and move on from there? Is there a consensus on doing that? I'm kind of sideways too, but we've got one too. We have consensus on doing it. So we will pull that item, and I will work with the superintendent and staff to get as soon as possible a meeting where we can discuss that.
And Madam Chair,
And-
if I may, while we're on the subject, the most urgent item for our legislative, for our lobbyist is for the board to reach consensus regarding a meeting in one of our schools with our state delegation. We need to get that date established as soon as humanly possible, but we can't establish a date until the board has agreed that we want to pursue that event again, like we did last year.
I believe that we did, and I will go back and look at that workshop, but I believe when Ms. Green was here, we did state that we wanted to have the fall meeting again.
Well, she's
And-
not clear on that, so could we take a
Okay,
consensus?
we will, okay.
now?
Can we take consensus to have the fall meeting with the legislators as we did last year? Okay, so
I thought
that's
that was
that.
clear too, so.
I thought it was clear at the last
but it
meeting,
just
so
needs to
I
be
will.
scheduled.
I will work with the proper people to make sure that we have that, that we discuss that at this meeting as well. Okay? Anything else on that?
No, thank you.
All right. Okay. Now, thank you. Academic services.
Good morning, everybody. We have the Academic Services team here to answer any questions that you may have about the 25 consent agenda items under academic
I
services.
know. Can we make this quick by, if I just call out the numbers, and if anybody has anything, we'll stop, otherwise we'll keep going. Anything on the number one? Okay, number 2, I have a question on number 2.
Madam Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
No, that's okay. So number 1 is the approval of the 2019-20 District Mental Health Allocation Plan. So I just wanted a little more explanation on that. And I wanted to know how the statistics about the general funding that we get impacts that. For instance, yesterday's news press had a multi-page article about Minds Matter. And so Florida is the least funded state in the nation, and Lee County is the second to last funded in Florida. So when we are proposing to refer children from schools to some of our partner agencies, do we know what actually happens when those referrals are made?
We do,
Okay.
for the agencies that we have an MOU with. So for instance, with Salus Care, and we're growing our memoranda of understanding with several agencies so that we have improved communications and outcomes. And with Salus Care being our primary agency, I brought some statistics with me based on this school year. So we have had 2 Salus Care from December 1st through the end of the school year on May 30th, 351 referrals. 301 of those are what we consider our Part B referrals. There are referrals for students that are in need of services, and their parents have agreed that a referral is something they're interested in, and they are the students that are scheduled for their intake and assessment in under 2 weeks. So the phone calls are made to the parents once we send the referral within 48 hours, and they have their appointment, and they are seen for their first intake and assessment within that 2-week window. They were running under a week. And so that is part of our MOU. And then we had 50 expedited referrals as the result of threat assessment team recommendations to ensure that the students could walk right in and be seen immediately.
Okay.
We do have other statistics we are tracking with Salus Care regarding how many parents then follow through on those services, how many chose to go to a different provider, and how many chose not to seek services at that point.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just
And
wanted
that
that for
also,
the
that
record.
discussion was part of First Lady DeSantis's roundtable
Yes.
with some of our larger partner agencies there. The fact that we have funding challenges, the school district and our community mental health, and how really the legislature and also her initiative can help us with increased collaboration, but especially the funding components.
Thank you.
Okay, number 2, I do have a question on that one, and some of the subsequent ones that are talking about the FGCU and dual enrollment. This suggestion, this item is talking about having instructors go from FGCU going into the schools, correct?
Actually, for this one with Bonita Springs High School,
It's 3.
oh, this one is our generic ACE agreement.
Okay, well,
So is
it
your
must be
question about
3
Bonita
then.
Springs?
Right, yes, that's the one, number 3.
Okay.
And the question is, if that's a possibility for FGCU instructors to go into the schools, I have to, think about East Zone, which is further away, and it is more difficult for the students with transportation to get to FGCU. To me, it would be easier for an instructor to go out there than us trying to get students to find a way to get to the college.
So there are a couple of components to the dual enrollment opportunities for our Lee County students. You may notice that our agreement with Florida Southwestern State College is absent from this agenda, and that's because that one is a 2-year agreement, and we're currently starting year 2. So dual enrollment in general, there are 3 options. Students may either go to the college campus, they can take online courses, And also, we have what we call concurrent dual enrollment, where our own Lee County instructors that meet qualifications for the college and universities with whom we partner can actually teach the college classes as part of the high school schedule. So at FSW, we have those three options, and one of our really large components at several schools is the concurrent component, where our students can engage in DE during their high school day with adjunct professors that are also our instructors. Now with FGCU, we have been unable to, until the agreement with Bonita Springs High School, we were unable to engage them in a model other than a full-time enrollment at FGCU for our students. So through the Bonita Springs High School model with their collegiate academy, FGCU agreed to allow the Bonita Springs High School teachers to qualify as adjuncts and teach via FGCU during the high school day. So we're really using Bonita Springs High School teachers as our primary model, so that the students in this particular collegiate academy can use, we use our high school teachers that are also adjuncts, and they qualify as such under FGCU.
So it's the same that has happened with FSW previously?
Yes.
It's just that FGCU is finally deciding to let us do that.
In a very structured environment, such as the collegiate academy. Yes. Now, we do have an option where we could have an FGCU instructor come onto high school campus at Bonita Springs if we did not have a qualified instructor on staff already at Bonita High. But that's a model that we, I do not believe Jeff Estes has that model for next year, since it's our first year engaging in the academy.
And can that model be done somewhere else as well?
If FGCU is willing to expand it, that would be our point, where they would need to be at the table to determine if they wanted to grow that model.
Okay.
So for our other students right now, they're more the on-campus with FGCU, except for the Collegiate Academy at Bonita, and they have all of the options currently through FSW at all of our schools.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Item 4, yes,
I
ma'am.
had a question on 3 as well. Which one's cheaper? Having our student go to FGCU or having an adjunct professor teach on our campus?
So if we did the concurrent dual enrollment sections where our teachers that have master's degrees and are qualified under FGCU as adjuncts, that actually is a no FTE exchange, no tuition. We simply buy the books and materials for the college courses. That's our most economical option, which is why the Bonita Springs High School model is really, it's kind of a pioneer with FGCU, and also it's innovative, but it's also going to be more economical for us. Having a professor come onto the high school campus would be a little more costly because we have to pay their salary and the textbooks. And then having the students go to campus, we pay the tuition rate. So that's the most expensive.
And then, Ms. Gittens, in terms of the discussion regarding a collegiate academy, I think that that would require us to look more broadly at the academic programs that are offered in each zone and determine whether the collegiate academy should perhaps replace another highly rigorous program in one of those schools, because we're looking at the number of students that qualify per zone for those programs and whether it makes sense to even offer that in another zone. So.
Well, that's something that's coming up later that I really do want to discuss, and that's the distribution of those students that qualify for those programs, because at this point, I don't think that it's equitable. So, because basically what you're saying is, because this area and this zone has mostly level 1s, 2s, and 3s, that they don't warrant to get the same program.
No, that's not at all what I'm saying.
No.
What I'm saying is we have an IB program and Cambridge A's program available, and Collegiate Academy could perhaps replace one of those, but adding an additional costly program might not necessarily make sense. That's why I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm not saying that they don't qualify. I'm saying when you look at our zones and our population, you just have to make sure we're not offering too many programs for the number of students who qualify. That's all I'm
No,
saying.
and I totally agree, and it's a cost factor in there. Yes, ma'am.
So I just think when we do get to that point, one thing we have to consider is the data and look at the success rates of students who participate in those programs.
Very much so. Yes.
Okay.
Totally agree with that. Okay, anyone else on 3? Going on to 4, 5?
Oh.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, so on 4, the mobile crisis unit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the Center for Progress and Excellence, we have this agreement. And so my question is, in looking through the agreement, I'm not sure if it has been explored, what is the liability to the district when they are called and they transport, as what happened about 2 weeks ago, transport a child out of Lee County to Charlotte County without even notifying the parents. I'm just concerned about like what really happens when these agreements are implemented, and have we looked at all of those possibilities?
I have a correction to make. It's late breaking news, and it actually addresses the concern. It's unfortunate in one hand that Alex Oliveris and I, the executive director of CPE, were discussing most recently with the Mobile Crisis Response Team. They have been unable to secure insurance in order to transport. So we will need to transport students through road patrol that are Baker acted. The benefit to the Mobile Crisis Response Team is that they have succeeded when they arrive in de-escalating students to the point where their parents are able to engage in services. And it does not always happen that way, but we have had a higher success rate in using them in de-escalation. And then they provide, because they have their staff with them, the parent is there. We would like to make every effort for a parent to get onto campus during this process so that everyone is involved. And they're able to provide services and follow-up to that family before they need to transition them into a more longer-term solution. So they will not be transporting, so that answers part of our liability
Right.
question. However,
Okay.
we're back to the traditional method of transporting should involuntary hospitalization be necessary.
Are we pulling this item?
No, because I believe the agreement says that a peer specialist will accompany any student to the receiving facility to ensure an appropriate transition. But in the agreement, we didn't have that they would physically transport the student.
Can you define that, peer specialist?
So part of their team with the Mobile Crisis Response Team, under their grant for Circuit 20, is that they have not only a peer specialist, but a licensed mental health professional and access to a psychiatrist when they are de-escalating a student and developing a plan for the family with follow-up and transition. Or if they're doing an involuntary hospitalization under a Baker Act, that they have all those pieces and consultation in play with the student, the parent, and the school-based staff if they're called to a school. Because they're also called to homes. They serve 24/7.
So, in the school environment, what is our fail-safe as far as notifying the parents? I mean, because under the law, under the statutes, minors cannot consent to voluntary placement, but I can't imagine that we would transport and involuntarily place a child without notifying the family. And so is that part of what we must do?
I know that every effort will continue to be made to reach parents. The challenge that we have is, at least when we have had to involve our SROs, that has become then a function of law enforcement, and then they take over that proceeding. With the Mobile Crisis Response Team, I can meet with Alex and ask him what those assurances will be, since this is a more trauma-sensitive way of conducting this. But what is their stance if we're unable to reach a parent, and then what will our stance be? We will always want to have a parent reached, and so I can research that and get back to you, because I think that will be more of a district protocol on our end than the Mobile Crisis Response Team. I think that can be our process.
Right, and that would go hand in hand with any recurring liabilities.
So I will research that and have an answer for you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to 5, 6,
I know people who work with these.
7. I do have a question on 7. Pulling it up 1 second.
I have a question too. Is this the first year for VPK at James Stevens?
Ms. LaFountain.
Yes, it would be the first year.
Okay, great.
So, yeah, they've had the school improvement cohort 4 grant for several years, and that grant reduces the amount of money provided to that school each year. And so this is one of the cost-saving ways so that we can sustain the program there.
That's awesome, especially since it's kind of underutilized, so I'm really excited about that for James Stevens, so
Yeah.
thank you.
What is the distribution of VPKs across the county, across the district? I mean, are they, how many are in each
In each zone?
zone? Yeah.
Well, we actually have 19 sites. We have, let's see, I think 3 in the west zone. Primarily, our VPK, our pre-K sites are in the east zone, with a few down, like we have Bonita, Pine Woods, Villas. But most of them are in the east zone.
Okay, and have we been doing it long enough to get that data that shows how it does affect the students? I mean, we know that it's a definite academic effect.
Yes, we've done it. We collect data all the time. We're always looking at data. We have not done a longitudinal study in probably, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years, maybe even a little bit more. But at one point, we did do a longitudinal study where we actually followed our kids up to about 6th or 7th grade and found that lower retention rates, lower children going into ESE, you know, so yeah, we do look at that every year.
Okay, and if you can maybe share that with us through an email or something like that, or let us know where to get that.
Okay.
Okay?
Do that.
Anything else on 7?
I want to be clear, what is it specifically you'd like Ms. LaFountain to be able to share?
Well, no, just some of the data that shows how effective it is in each area. Okay, number 8. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering why this one is no cost to the district as compared to the others that are cost to the district.
Great question. This agreement is for the Teacher Academy at Ida S. Baker High School, and it is a partnership with Florida Gulf Coast University, specifically the College of Education, to offer a course that is taught by a teacher named Claudia Cassione. She is an Ida Baker High School teacher that is an adjunct professor at FGCU, and she will teach on campus this, the Introduction to Education course in the Teaching Academy. The reason it's no charge is she's teaching it as a class period under her general teacher contract, and we already have the books and materials on hand.
Okay.
That's
Thanks.
awesome.
Okay, others on 8? 9? I did have something on that. I think you've already answered that one. 10, 11, 12, 13. I do have something on 13. The question I had was, it's a great initiative. I would like to see some of the same data for other demographics of other groups of students. This is just for the ELL.
Correct.
And we know that there's the achievement gap that affects other minorities as well. And so the question is, this is being done for the ELLs. What are we specifically doing for the others in the achievement gap?
So, and I'll let Ms. Rivera come up and talk specifically about this particular supplemental instructional material so you can hear what this is really targeting. You want to come on up, Evelyn? Thank you.
Good morning.
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 The purpose of this grant is to have a person that is going to provide supplementary support to international centers and also to offer high-quality PD. And also the goal is to increase graduation rate among the ELLs.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Number, where are we? 14? Any questions? I had one on that. Okay, 15? 16? 17? 18? And 19. I do have one on 19. Give me 1 second. I guess it's kind of in general about all of these grants. How do these grants affect all of the schools or more than just one school in the district? With some of them, they have like 1 FTE or 2 FTEs. Is that a district position that they will affect, district-wide at the different schools? I'm not sure about that.
So you really want to, what is the target of this particular grant, and then how widespread it is? And we'll let Jeannie talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so this particular grant is in its third year. We're just starting the third year. It was a grant that was made available to our district when James Stephens was a turnaround school. And so one of the things that happened in the transition actually between Mr. Bowens and Mr. Savage was that it was determined that if we could look at the pre-K, about putting a pre-K program at James Stephens and looking at trying to align pre-K to up to grade 3 would be an advantage for those students living in that area and would help give them, kind of a head start into kindergarten and help them be more ready for kindergarten. So we wrote this grant, and so like I said, it's a 5-year grant. It was what I was just talking about. The funds reduce each year. We negotiate every year with the state as to what they'll pay and how much they'll pay. We're still in negotiations with them right now. But this is really to really look at the alignment from pre-K to grade 2. It was an innovative initiative that we wrote to do this at James Stephens, specifically because one of the needs of that school at the time when it was a turnaround school was that the children coming in were not ready and did not have quality early childhood care. And we really wanted to see if we gave them that opportunity to have the quality care, the comprehensive services that would follow beyond pre-K, sort of like Head Start, was really the idea to kind of see what would happen and would that make a difference. And so that's what we're doing. We're just starting our third year.
So this is specific to James Stephens?
This particular grant was written specifically to James Stephens. It was only available to James Stephens and I want to say East Lee that year, but East Lee ended up with with the UNICIG grant. And so we did this one for James Stephens.
Okay. Are you thinking of doing it for any other schools?
It's not available to any other schools. This was made available to the states for schools that met certain criteria.
Okay, thank you. All right, that was 1920. 1 second. Can you explain the difference between Title I and Title I Part A? I'm sorry to keep you bouncing up and down.
That's okay. All right, so Title I Part A is the regular Title I program that you're familiar with, which is where schools that meet certain poverty criteria receive money to support their schools in supplemental fashion. So to purchase supplemental materials, personnel, resources, whatever they need. The other one that you see on there is Title I Part C, which is really just the migrant grant. So they call them Part A, Part C, but it's Title I regular and then migrant.
Okay, and are the Title I funds, you said supplemental?
Yes.
So when a school gets their budget, if they're Title I, that's an extra bucket over here?
Yes,
funded.
exactly. One of the laws that govern Title I is that that all schools have basic needs that are provided for the school, administration, teachers to teach their classes, textbooks, and so Title I is supplemental, so it's for those schools that have higher, more poverty children in their schools, thinking that those schools have higher needs, and so this is to meet those extra needs. It's not to meet the basic requirements of an education, but it's to give them more so that they can help those students.
So basically, a Title I school could run basically on their budget?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the Title I is
That's exactly
extra?
right.
Okay.
Perfect. You got it.
All right, thank you. Okay, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, bingo. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you to my team for being here.
Thank you,
All
Dr.
right.
Spiro.
Okay, moving on to business services, and thank you all for coming and providing us information. Business services. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning, how are you today?
Oh, I thought they were coming with you. Good morning. Okay, we have, number one, piggyback, questions, comments? Number two, certificates of participation. Can you give us a little more detail on that one, please?
Sure, I'd like to ask Ms. Letcher to come and speak to that.
Morning.
Morning.
So I spoke to you all at our last briefing about House Bill 7070 and how we were going to have to now go out for COPS versus the sales tax bond. And that's what this is in reference to. This is the resolution to go out for that COPS. And actually, in a little bit later in the workshop, our financial advisor, Mr. Jerry Ford, and Will Reed will be here to discuss this in depth.
Right. Okay.
Okay?
Well, we'll hold on until then.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much. Human resources.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning. Okay, number one. My first question is summer. I was a little thrown off by that one.
Say that again.
It's the summer. Are those appointments or whatever for this summer, or is that next summer?
Sometimes by the time we get the paperwork,
Okay.
we're a victim of our paperwork and when it's received in human resources.
Okay. All right. Summer's done. That's why I had the question.
Which we're working on, right?
Yes,
We're working on
we
automating.
certainly are.
Okay, number two. And number three. And I had a question on that. Anyone else? And I know you're kind of behind the eight ball on that. But I was aware that there were quite a few positions at Island Coast, and they're not listed on this list, as far as transfers and that type of thing.
Can you be a little more specific? Are you talking about they're not listed on this agenda item, or?
Under certified personnel.
Right.
There were quite a few teachers that either transferred or did whatever, and they are not listed in here. I think there's
Again, we're the victim of when we receive all the paperwork, so we process it just as expeditiously as we get it. And it does take a while for everything to get caught up once we receive everything in human resources.
Okay, so there will still be additional.
Still processing,
Okay.
yep.
All righty. Any other questions from anyone on 3, on 4. My only thing on 4 is, Superintendent, if you can possibly update us on what's happening with the hiring of additional staff, et cetera, for Mr. Williams to complete that attorney piece for the district.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that we're coming forward in August, early August, with a model. I think it's the 9th or the.
Right, so the first step would be the board approval of the concept. And then from there, we would, but yes, we have some initial information, and then we're going to continue to expand on that in August and revisit the totality of the legal services.
Yeah, so the team, they have a recommendation, they have a recommended organizational chart, job descriptions, I believe, and that will all be presented upcoming in August.
Okay. Any other questions on that one? And on number 5, the instructional calendar waiver, I had a.
Yeah, that was one school that didn't meet the deadline, but had followed all of the requirements. And so they didn't go with the original group because they did everything they were supposed to do. They just didn't do it in the right time.
Okay, so this is still an option for the school to opt to do their open house during the week or doing it on
Right.
Saturday
This
and
school
take that day?
did vote and approve that. That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. All right, number 5, that was number 5. Number 6? Anyone? 7? 8? 9? And I believe you're done.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming. Okay, we move on to operations. Is there?
All right, either Mr. Pratt or Mr. Rickenbacker.
You drew the short straw.
It's okay. Good morning, Board.
morning.
Good morning, Dr. Atkins.
Okay, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and, wait a minute, 9, I had one question. Oh, on number 9.
Yes, ma'am.
The civil engineering. I know it's a 3-year contract. Can you tell us how much has been spent,
Right.
of that?
That's a figure, I believe it's 500,000. That's
Right.
been carried over year after year. It's basically unfunded. But we leave that parked so that if we have a lot of work in a different fiscal year, we don't have to keep coming back to the board to get it increased. I believe last year we only spent 145,000.
Okay.
With the new ISOC money coming in, there could be a potential, depending on what maintenance projects come out of the ISOC work, to engage with civil engineers. It's kind of an as-needed basis. I recently had to do a survey for South Florida Water Management on one of our bus barns that had a violation. So, we pick them through the continuing contract. We engage with them to resolve those permitting issues. We use them for traffic studies, which we've just done 3. There may be a few more coming down the pike. So it's pretty much an as-needed basis, and my understanding is you approve the amount of 500 yearly. However, it's not funded until the projects come on board and the Finance and Budget Department finds the projects and provides the funding for those projects.
Okay, let me make sure I understand that piece. So we approved the 500, but it's not funded until, in other words, until we find out how much that project's going to cost.
or what the project need is. So we have continuing contractors, under 200,000, over 200,000 to 2 million. Again, those are unfunded. It's based on the 5-year capital plan and the need as it comes up.
Okay, and as it comes up, do you come back and at least inform us?
My capital presentation every month when I'm doing.
That's it?
And the ISOC report as well, when they brief you on all the projects that are going through.
Okay.
And usually you'll see on the requisitions, there's always a statement, what funding source is providing this funding. So when you approve all of the POs and so forth, or superintendent's office.
Other questions, comments? Okay. Number 10, anything? All right. Thank you so much, sir. See you in a bit.
Okay.
Are we done?
No.
What am I missing?
Oh, you're on it.
The public hearings? Oh, no, I'm sorry, L, on the leasing corporation. And do we have someone that's going to?
Oh, we have an item coming up on that?
I know I have.
They're going to come up a little bit later in this
Right, for the
workshop.
Yeah, so the leasing corporation, it's basically the same resolution as the head of the leasing corporation. You all have to approve the resolutions and things for the certificates of participation as well. So that you'll have a part of that in the meeting.
And you're going to discuss that in a bit?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Public hearings, any comments and questions on that, number 1 or number 2? Number two is our community involvement or our advisory groups. And so we'll be doing the public hearing for the changes, basically the videotaping and making sure that we will have a representation, every effort to have a balance of representation, I think are the 2 main things that are listed in there. And we have gone over that, and that will be up for our public hearing. Any comments or questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I won't be supporting it.
Oh.
Because I believe that we basically worked on a process before we defined the policy. Policy comes first. We haven't had a real conversation about the policy. We put a process in place without an understanding of what the policy would be. Now we're approving the policy after we've put a process in place. I'm not comfortable with the policy, so I won't be supporting it, and I just want the board to know that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments on that section? Okay, I believe that is all for agenda review. And we will move back to the workshop. Item number 3, which is district's FSA results and school grades, and I believe that's going to be Mr. Spiro, Dr. Spiro.
And Dr. Itzen.
Oh, no, go right ahead.
And it's a whole crew. Welcome, everybody.
Whole family.
Yeah, and we have seats for you. Isn't that excellent?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having us this morning. With me, I have Dr. Richard Itzen, as well as our directors of teaching and learning, Dr. Bethany Quisenberry and Miss Lori Houchin. This morning, Dr. Itzen's just going to give us a broad overview of the school grades, and once they're done, I'll talk about action steps. So now that he shares the broad overview of what the data results were, we're going to talk about what we're doing moving forward. Dr. Quisenberry and Ms. Houchin are here as well because they're here to attempt to answer any questions that you may have specific around our programs moving forward, and we're going to try to answer those for you today. If we're unable to answer anything specifically, certainly we'll come back with the information that you're requesting. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Itzen. Dr. Itzen?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Glad to be here. I get the privilege of reporting district trends to you, but I'm really happy that Dr. Quisenberry and Ms. Houchin are here, as well as Dr. Spiro, who can provide a little bit more insight into the trends and the numbers. So we're going to jump right in and review the components of district and school grading. And Mr. Bradley is helping us out with the slides, so here we go.
Next,
So
Bradley.
the first 4 components are achievement components, and they are based on FSA results, specifically the percentage of students who score in level 3 through 5. ELA math and science apply to all levels. Social studies is specific to middle and high schools. In middle school, the social studies would be the civics and, of course, exam results. And at high school, it would be the U.S. history results. The learning gains, and you'll see 2 overall learning gains on this slide and then 2 on the next for the lowest 25%. Some years ago, they wanted to emphasize gains over actual achievement, and so now we have, for elementary schools, we have 3 achievement measures, but 4 learning gains measures. So it's weighted on the learning gains side. It evens out a little bit in middle school, and then high schools have some additional measures that are on the screen now. The middle school acceleration is a combination of students that pass high school and, of course, exams, primarily Algebra 1, but we have students doing geometry as well. And it also includes industry certifications that students are able to complete in middle school. The last 2 are specific to high schools. Those 2 are kind of unique in that they are lagged, and that is the state doesn't collect the data for graduation rate. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks. The state really doesn't collect the data they need for graduation rate until Survey 5, which is in August, and so when they changed back to reporting the grades in July, obviously they couldn't include that. So the graduation rate that you'll look at this morning is actually from 17-18. And college and career acceleration looks at the number and percentage of graduates who have completed either an AP test, IB, ACE, a dual enrollment course, or an industry certification. And again, that information is collected after July, so it's from the year before. So those are the components, and there are 11 of them, and the district has all 11, of course. As I mentioned, elementary has 7 components, middle school would have 9, and then high schools would have 10, and the district would have all 11. So these are the criteria, some additional criteria for the school grading system. Schools and districts must test at least 95% of the students. In order to be included, there's a quote-unquote full-year criteria, and what that looks like at the school level is they are in the same school in the October and the February FTE counts. And the same at the district level. So it's possible that a student could be included in the district grade that is not included in a school grade if they've changed schools during the year but not changed districts. Yes?
So, was it Pine Island that did not get a grade because they didn't have 95% of their students tested?
Right.
And
Yes, so we do have one school with an incomplete, and that's what is awarded if they don't test the appropriate number or percentage of students. In the case of Pine Island, as you know, they're very small schools, so a small number of students really changes those percentages, and my understanding is they had a number of families with multiple students in the school who decided not to have their students participate in state testing. So the process now is that we can submit an appeal for them in order for them to release the grade, and that appeal would be based on if we and the state believes that the students that they did test are representative of the school. Further, my understanding is that we don't have to appeal it, but the state is going to look at that anyway, so they would prefer our input on that in terms of if we believe it's representative or we don't. Yes.
If we could go back to the last item on the last slide, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. On the college and career acceleration state components, did you say for the college acceleration that a student needs only to finish or to take one or pass one advanced?
Yes, this was changed a few years ago. So the pool of students that they're looking for is the on-time graduates. So once that's clear, then they go back and check to see of those students, how many of them passed one of those 5 things, an AP exam, IB exam, ACE, dual enrollment course, or an industry certification at any time during their 4-year career.
Pass one test?
Yes.
That's pretty low standards, isn't it, for the state? Do we keep a record on how many students are achieving, for instance, a Cambridge ACE diploma? Do we have those separately for our own use? Because to me, fine that we, find a class that somebody can take that's not in the entire AP program and pass it, or a dual enrollment class. But as far as us lifting us up to be a world-class school system, hopefully we have raised our expectations beyond what the state is saying.
So I'd like to go ahead and answer that for you twofold. First, I've asked Matt Kay, who is over our advanced academic programs, to do for me an analysis of the pass rate of IB students, ACE students, as well as students in programs such as AVID, as compared to their peers. And he has that for me, and then I'll be presenting that to Cabinet, and then Dr. Atkins certainly will then can share that with the board as well. I will tell you, in the schoolhouse, with our 14 high school principals, they are going to continue to open up doors for students. They're not going to limit students with the number of classes that they take for the most rigorous courses in their building, because a student may only count once for school grade. That doesn't matter in the schoolhouse. They're going to continue to go towards that diploma or that certificate for those particular students.
Yeah, because I know it's been several years ago before I was on the board. I had asked for data on students, minority students, and I specifically remember getting something that was something like past one or more.
Correct.
And to me, that is not an accurate snapshot of what we are as a school district, because, let's be frank, the kids know this too. The kids know, hey, teacher Jones at this school teaches this AP class. Let's just raise our GPA because that's the easiest AP class. And, that's the truth of the matter of how that goes. And I think hopefully my point is that we as a school district are not just resting our laurels on what these low requirements are from the state, even though yay for our school grade, but.
In terms of school grading, the state kind of changed the focus on that. It used to be that we would receive weighted points. If a student did 5 AP exams, then we got more credit, so to speak, than just one. And then they changed it to essentially how many students have an experience like that. So they're trying to get us to provide all students, I think, with some type of experience like that, not necessarily rely on a small group of students who are doing a lot.
Okay.
And then this isn't just about whether the student takes the course, this is about them passing
As well
the
as pass.
certification or the AP exam.
Yes, they have to take the course and pass the exam for each of those.
If we go ahead, I would just want to go a little bit more in depth with the learning gains criteria. These are the criteria on the screen here, and the unique thing that was done in 15-16 is to divide up level 1 and level 2 into sub-levels. And the rationale behind that is if the student starts out in 1A, so to speak, the lowest level of level 1, if they move up one of these categories every year, in 5 years they would make it to proficiency. In the distant past, we had some learning gains criteria where students could make it every year, but they'd never get to level 3. right? So that was the rationale behind this.
Is that something that is from DOE, or is that something we're doing?
Oh, that's the state accountability system.
Right, okay. So,
So this particular model was implemented in 15-16 after we changed from FCAT to FSA.
okay, so it allows actually for that better growth component of, learning gains by doing it this way, is what you're saying?
Right, so a student who is, for example, in the level 1A in 3rd grade math, then if they have a score in 4th grade math, then they look at which achievement level they're in. And there's some overlap, but normally you have to move up in scale score points in skill in order to move up in levels.
Does this correlate to the teachers, like their VAM scores, if a student moves from like low to high in level 1 or whatever, do they get credit for movement?
That's a very good question. The VAM model is completely separate, although certainly students moving up impacts a teacher's VAM score positively. It would have been real nice if, when they came out with the requirement for VAM, to adopt this learning gains model for everybody, but they did not do that. The committee of folks who went and looked at the various options decided on one that's a lot more complicated than that. It's a covariate model or a regression model that looks at where the scale score of the student in the previous year and where they are now, and compares that to other like students.
And there are not the incremental buckets or movement, so it doesn't allow to show that growth as much as this model does.
Right, it's more a measure of, did the student get the score that they were expected to get this school year, and that expected score is based on their score from the previous year and one or more of 10 different student level factors.
Has there been discussion of bringing the two closer together?
I mention it to them as often as I can, but they have not moved in that direction at all.
Is it something that we, as the board, might be able to help move it if we put it on our legislative agenda?
I think that would be a positive idea, to see if they can clarify or unify the two systems.
Could you give us, in brief, a statement stating that?
Sure. The advantage of the VAM model, and I don't want to derail this into a VAM discussion, but the advantage of that is it takes into account student level factors, whereas this model does not. Whether you increase from 1A to 1B is for all students, but in the VAM model, it takes into account if you're ELL, if you have an exceptionality, a variety of factors that impact your progress.
And the last thing I want to say is the concern that you said moving from down through this continuum could take 5 years. That's frightening. I mean, if a child's behind, it's going to take them 5 years to catch up.
In this model, if they make the minimum progress.
The previous model, they may never catch up.
Right.
Wow.
There's a really, really great exercise that I did at a SAC meeting at Pine Woods once, and it really, really illustrates how this works. And I've sent an email to her while we're having this discussion, so that hopefully I can share it with everybody. It just really helped me to understand how the math works and what the teachers go through and what the students go through and all of that. So hopefully I can share that with everybody.
Okay, we're going to jump right into the district numbers then. These are the 11.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have one question.
Just one question. So regarding the grading scale from the testing companies, that has not remained consistent. That's changed. So how does that impact what we're talking about here? The learning gains.
So we've had several changes over the years. The most recent one was from FCAT to FSA. And that was done in the spring of 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And then the school grading system, as we know it today, was implemented in 15-16. So it's been consistent for the last 4 years.
Okay. And we're talking about the grading scale on the tests from the test creators. That,
You're talking about our curriculum? Our textbook
No, she's talking
curriculum?
no,
You're talking about
Scale
who
scores.
creates these
Yeah.
assessments?
right.
Yes, this system depends on where you draw the cut scores on that scale.
Right.
And so those were done in the 15-16 school year, and they have not changed,
They
and the
have not
tests have
changed.
not changed.
Okay,
So it's all been consistent
okay,
for the last 4 years.
thank you.
However, this is the first school year back, so our fifth graders have been computer-based for 3 years.
I think so.
3 years, so they were paper-based this year.
Okay,
All third, fourth, and fifth went back to paper-based
Right,
this
right.
year, so that was one change.
okay.
Yeah, everything was moving to computer-based, and then that stopped, and so 3 through 6th grade is all back on paper now.
Thank you.
Okay, so you see our percentages in each of these areas at the district level, and I'm glad to say there's a lot of green up there. We see progress in 3 out of the 4 achievement areas, and some really great jump in our graduation rate. That's for 17-18. We expect that to continue to increase, and some really good math learning gains can be seen here.
We're hoping with one component of the science, I mean, one of the things that we had happen the previous year is we had one of our large high schools that only tested a select number of students in biology. That came, I mean, that problem came to roost this year. And so this year, that particular high school, I believe, had to test over, like, from 150 students to 700 students. And all of that is a part of this year's data. So, you know, you're never going to run away from a problem by, you know, gaming the system in terms of when, because those students have to be tested at some point. The good news is that we you know, faced up to that this year, and of course, it shouldn't be a problem next year. So you're testing way more students, at least in biology, this year than you did the previous year.
And you'll see there's a slide on the science scores, so the biology scores took a little bit of a hit this year. But at least everybody was in there that, as far as we know, that should have been in biology.
Because if you think about it, if you're only testing 4 and 5 students at a particular school, then all of a sudden you're starting to test, you know, the different levels, it's going to have an impact.
Absolutely.
So on the next slide, you see some of the same numbers, just in a slightly different format. The way this is done is all the numbers are added up and you get total points earned. So you see that our points earned was 646 this year, which was up 10 points. And that increased our percent of points earned by 1 percentage point. We compare ourselves to the state in lots of ways and other districts in a number of different ways, but one of those is, of course, the grades. And we know that about a third of the districts got an A, 24 districts out of 67, 30 districts got a B, and 13 districts got a C. So we are right in there with the group, the solid group of 30 districts. And you see that out of the 67 districts, we like to look at our ranking each year, which took a little bit of a hit this year.
Can you explain how we can go up in points and down in rank?
Yeah, so I think the simplest way to say that is we improved, but some districts, other districts improved more. We did look at that a little bit, and the majority of districts who improved greatly this year were a lot of small districts where less student improvement adds up to a bigger percentage for them. And the other was graduation rates. Some districts have really moved that ahead, as have we, but that was one of the factors we saw in the other districts' improvement.
Isn't it a factor in the graduation rates, though? And I don't know if other districts are doing this, and moving some of those students to alternative schools and charter schools and kind of removing them from the factor.
Well, they've kind of eliminated that loophole. So our district rate includes all the charter schools, the alternative schools. The used to be that students transferring out, like to adult education, were taken out of the calculation. Now they are counted as non-graduates. So all the students who go from our regular schools either to adult ed or to charter schools, to the alternative schools, are still counted.
Is there a cutoff point that, in other words, by this month, if they're not out, they're going to count?
No, it runs all the way through the last day of their senior year. It has to be within a 4-year period.
So if a student was enrolled at school X and they get sent to the alternative school, their test scores, even when they're at the alternative school, will go back to school X.
At any time during their 4 years?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I have, let's say, anecdotal information from sources at several different high schools that about the last couple weeks of school for the seniors, that seniors that were lacking credits were pulled into intensive credit catch-up classes. And I mean, that's, again, it's one of those things, it's great for our graduation rate if this information bears out. And as I said, it was not just one high school. But on the other hand, it really concerns me that, you know, we talk about gaming the system, and I don't know if we can consider that gaming the system, doing whatever you can. Definitely you want to get those kids to graduate, but do we keep any kind of statistics on that, or is there any way to track how real this is, that kids are being pulled in that way?
I'm not sure we can track exactly when they go into credit recovery programs. We certainly can get a hold of numbers about how many students need to retake a course, for example, or successful the second time around.
Yeah, but what really concerns me is not the fact that they have that opportunity, because certainly they should have that opportunity if they've failed a class to take it in the proper manner. But the information that I've gotten, pretty much straight from horse's mouth in several instances, is that schools really, really pull those kids in, and again, that to me just doesn't seem like the right way to do things, winning the game however we can.
I guess for me, I really would need to know exactly what it is they were doing, so I can speculate. So are they, the last month of school, all of a sudden being pulled out of the regular courses and taking accelerated online classes?
Absolutely, and I've heard it from people, as I said, I see somebody else with high school contacts nodding her head. Yes, it's a definite occurrence that, oh, they don't look like they're going to graduate, well, let's put them here, and they take an intensive credit recovery so that they'll pass.
Well, and obviously the way that's supposed to work is years before, if they fail a course as a freshman, to do it right away again, either take the class again or do it in credit recovery. But we'd have to look into that, I suppose.
Well, and again, I think a couple things on that. One, the implementation of our graduation tracker. I think it's going to, we're already seeing improvements in our graduation rate as a result of that more intensive focus. And then this year, again, you have an executive director that's going to be focused specifically on high schools, high school only. So, you know, those are the types of things that I think will be much more agile in addressing.
Yeah, and I don't want to be misunderstood and have it that they shouldn't be able to do this. They absolutely should. But the fact that right at the very end, when it looks like they may not pass, they're all of a sudden pulled into this, that's just to me, I guess it's a moral issue to me, it's just not the right way to do it.
And as Dr. Idson was talking about, there's a process in place. So when we talk about the freshmen, for example, you fail one course your first semester of your freshman year. Ideally, it's the second semester of your freshman year that you're trying to make up that course so that you don't dig yourself a hole and get further behind. So your senior year comes around, you're trying to play catch-ups.
I know about that.
Right.
I
So
also
we're
know about this thing that's done. That's all I can say.
Yes.
And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, I'm going to break in here. We're running a little bit behind, so we need to move a little forward to catch up. And yes, go ahead.
Okay, so as a former high school counselor, I just want to say that there are extenuating circumstances oftentimes. And once I had a student who was in an automobile accident and was out for a while. So at the end, he really, really wanted to graduate. And we put him in E-2020, and he retrieved his credits that he had lost. I mean, so I think that we need to, I don't think it's gaming the system. I think it's doing what's right for kids and helping them to be able to meet the requirements for graduation after they've put that whole 12 years in.
And I'm not talking about that kind of situation. I'm gonna drop it, and I'll talk to you later about what I know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So on the next slide, there's another way that we compare ourselves to other districts, and here you see the 10 largest districts and the percent of their schools that received an A or a B. And this past year, we were at 64%, and so you'll see that there are 3 districts that are higher than us there, and so we're doing better than the majority of the large districts. We also put our neighbors on there, and so we're looking good compared to one of them.
Okay.
How many of those large districts have 0 DA schools?
None, I believe.
Oh, no, there's one.
There's one?
Lee County.
Oh, okay, yes, yes, okay. I thought you meant the other ones, right, so.
You thought he gave him a trick question.
I'm sorry, I'm just very, very proud of that. I think that's phenomenal, and I think that our focus on our Tier 3 schools has gotten us there. And I think that our focus going into next year on our Tier 1 schools will get us even further. So thank you for the work that everybody did to get us here.
The next 4 or 5 slides are all on individual grade levels and subjects. I'm not sure we need to go through that. I think you'll see that some very positive numbers, especially for elementary and middle in ELA and math. Some of the, as we've already noted, some of the science numbers are challenging. In 5 and 8 science, for example, the whole state is kind of stagnated and has not really seen a lot of improvement there. So I don't know that we need to look specifically at these grade level numbers. I think some of the end of course exam numbers, high school math, biology, those are some of the things that I think Ms. Houchin and Dr. Quisenberry and Dr. Spiro can speak to perhaps when we get to the last slide.
Absolutely.
I'll talk about the focus. So back to the school grades. So this is a basic breakdown of the 2 years. Under 2018, there are 2 1s that are kind of superimposed on each other, 1D and 1F, and then you have the note that the 1F school from 2018 was a charter school that closed that summer. So when we went into, and you can go to the next slide, when we went into this school year, we went in with 1 differentiated accountability school, as you know, and now we have 0. This is the breakdown of school grades by level. I don't know if there's anything real fascinating here, but you see that high schools, the majority of the schools are C, and the grading system has always been a little bit more challenging for our high schools, perhaps just because there are so many different things to focus on. Middle schools, we have almost half of our schools that have A now, and so, and obviously D and Fs do not come into these charts at all. Some more specific numbers about the improvement. We had 20 schools that improved. 19 of them improved 1 letter grade, and I listed those schools for you in the notes of this PowerPoint. 1 improved 2 letter grades. That was Trafalgar Elementary. That went from a C to an A. And if you look at the following slide where we take charter schools out of this, you'll see that it's slightly more positive when we look at just our district schools, 23% increasing. These are some of the things that we've mentioned this morning during the course of this presentation, and the last slide are some of the things that our curriculum and instruction folks can speak to.
So let me go first off, say thank you, Dr. Itzen. I do appreciate you sharing that information with us. What the slide you see in front of you is really a broad view of the work that we're going to be continuing to do over the course of this next year. And this really began last year as a targeted approach, and we're going to continue to build on that approach. Our focus is to make sure that we are in schools working with the leadership in the schools to provide the support where they need. As Dr. Atkins has talked about this morning, we do have another executive director who's going to be, we have one that'll be working directly with high schools, one with middle schools, and then 2 that'll be working with our elementary schools as well, in conjunction with our directors of teaching and learning, and then of course our coordinators, our coaches, and our directors that are supporting our schools. Our curriculum maps and our instructional guides will continue, as well as the use of formative assessments to measure the progress along the way. You will see this year there's a heavier focus as well with social emotional learning standards that are going to be embedded into the instructional guides so that we could continue to support the building of relationships with students and meet the needs that we had talked about earlier. Our ELL supports, I had a very long conversation with Evelyn Rivera. They have another number of coaches that are going into schools to continue to target their supports, because that's one of our areas of greatest needs inside of our building, is making sure that we really drill down and support students from our ELL populations. We will continue focusing on rigor with our 5 high-yield instructional strategies that we're looking to become systemic across all of our schools, and of course providing enrichment opportunities for our upper tier students. Part of Dr. Santini's work this year is going to be working on rigor, especially in the area of middle school, which is really his area of expertise. So he and I are working with Ken Savage on identifying our schools that have greatest needs in the area of rigor. So for example, some schools may perform well in regard to the school grade, but when we dig into the data, you may see that the rigor is not at the level that it needs to be for the students that are in those buildings. And so Dr. Santini, part of his work is to work in the culture building and work on deepening the rigor inside of those classrooms as well. We're going to continue with our interventions and our extensions of activities that happen. That work comes to life through our PLCs, through our professional learning communities. And then, of course, the instructional coaching and the mentoring. We will continue with data chats where schools, teams will come in, meet with academic services to really talk about the formative data. And then our job is to really be there to support them as they continue to modify their school plans wrapped around their school improvement plan to make sure they're meeting the unique needs of their schools. And ladies, I don't know if you would like to, anything you want to share on those as well?
Sure. I just want to take an opportunity to piggyback on some of the data that Dr. Itzen was sharing. We shared the schools that went up in their letter grades, but we had quite a few schools that went way up in their points, but it just wasn't enough to go up a letter grade. You have schools like Mirror Lakes that went up, I think it was 70 points. They're still a C, but they went up 70 points. And so Lehigh Elementary, Sunshine Elementary, that had huge gains, but not quite as much publicity because they didn't go up the letter grade. But a big part of the changes that they made were, to Dr. Spiro's point, on the rigor and increasing rigor in their buildings. So some of the things that we've already began to implement is we have started strategic planning meetings with individual principals. So our schools that we have identified as needing additional support, our executive directors and our teams have been meeting to review trend data. So we have looked at data for the last 3 years that are content-based. So As Dr. Spiro mentioned as well, you have schools that might be an A, but their trend data shows that they still need improvement in their lowest 25%, or their trend data might show that they need improvement in their science. And so we're making sure that we are identifying those spots and then building a plan of support with our team and with their teams.
We're also involved in program analysis, so we're looking at some of our reading programs and the buckets and like which buckets are moving, which need intervention out of those schools that aren't moving those buckets, which are using the programs with fidelity, which need a reset. So we're looking at that. We've also, we established leading and learning teams this year. And so we did our summer kickoff with that, and last year we started monthly curriculum briefs. So that is for everyone to know in each subject area and each grade level what standards are coming up that following month, what kinds of questions you should see in the classroom, what kinds of activities you should see in the classroom, what kind of language should you see in the classroom. So we've gotten a lot of good feedback from everyone all around that we're all speaking the same language and helping students in that way. We increased training with our assistant principals for curriculum, and we're expanding that this year to go down to elementary as well, so that we show them what kind of data to have their eye on, when to make an intervention, when to have a celebration with that data. We also increased in our instructional guides, we increased the ELL and ESE support so that they're kind of just in time. Before they were just up at the top, and it was a nice chart, but teachers had to make those decisions. Now it's like, here's the right opportunity with the right strategy, and we're working across departments so that we get that expertise and get that in there.
Lori, how many teachers did you train in the Leading and Learning?
Over 1,000.
Right, so our Leading and Learning teams will be ongoing all year long to provide support for the PLCs. Our PLCs really is where the magic happens when they're analyzing the data, looking at instructional strategies and making instructional decisions. And so we really want to provide ongoing support for that, because we believe if we really provide a clear system on how that should look in all of our schools through some fidelity, we really feel like that will be another component to help us move our district forward.
What we found was we were doing a really good job of training our reading contacts, training our math contacts, training our science contacts, but we weren't getting down into the individual classrooms. We weren't getting to all of the teachers that are actually, providing that instruction. And so the Leading and Learning teams are opportunities for us to have one more step. So in an elementary school in 5th grade, you're gonna have a grade level only has maybe 7 to 8 people in 5th grade, and 3 of them will be coming down for trainings. And so making sure that that content support is right there and getting through to the people that we really need them to be at.
Okay. And we've got to move on, folks, really quickly. Yes,
Well,
Ms. Morgan.
I just want to say, I hope we don't wait for another year to have this conversation. I think it would be really helpful if at the conclusion of the first semester, we sit down and have presentations by the chiefs talking about virtually everything that we've gone through here, what's been done at high schools, what's been done at middle schools. Some examples that we have 10 schools that dropped, what's gone into those schools, and just, I think we need to revisit.
And additionally, part of the plan this year is to try to get some schools back in front of the board so that you have an opportunity to look at, okay, here's the broad district view of it, but now how are our strategies directly impacting individual schools? So hopefully we'll get some of that even before a semester report.
Okay, Ms. Patrica, quick.
So the high mobility rate is one of the main reasons we put in those curriculum maps and the guides, right?
Correct.
How do we measure whether they are being used in our schools with fidelity?
And so that is the multi-tiered approach to that. So our coaches and our coordinators that work directly with our PLCs, principals, so we have ongoing principal training around curriculum maps, instructional guides. One of the reasons we're deepening with the elementary assistant principals coming in is to make sure that we are becoming systemic throughout the whole institution with the use of curriculum maps and instructional guides. So it used to be that middle school and high school assistant principals were the only ones to get together to talk about the curriculum. Now we're bringing elementary into the fold as well. So that way we have a multi-tiered approach to making sure that everyone is using that same strategy.
Those conversations also come
data
about really
chats.
well in the data chats, as well as in our learning walks. So when we're doing learning walks in the schools, we're able to have those conversations with the principals, the assistant principals, and the leadership teams.
And I would like to say that when I first started in November on the board, and I met with Dr. Creel, and we talked about the fact that she had counted, I believe, 89 initiatives in different programs. So I was glad to hear you talk about the program analysis, because we are kind of stepping over each other, and to kind of rein that in and know which ones are being used right and are moving the ball, and which ones are not. So I, applaud that part as well.
Thank you.
And if nothing else, we need to move on. We're like 15 minutes behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
For all, and I'm sure if we have questions, board members will get those too.
Can't get rid of us that quickly. We're next.
I'll invite you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You'll stay for the next item as well. It's the testing calendar. Okay, so the next part is on what's called the Uniform Assessment Calendar, and Mr. Bradley has that on the screen now. We're not going to go through that specifically. I have a very brief PowerPoint that I'd like to highlight some concepts from that, but I think you have access to that document.
We do.
I think this is the third or fourth year that we are required to bring that to you for approval and then to submit it to the state. And I want to mention that I have two coordinators from my department in the audience, Chrissy Stout and Aaron Gronefeld, who take care of the logistics of testing for the entire district. And so if we need some real specific information about the testing calendar, they'll come up and help us out. So we're briefing this with you today, and what we expect to do is to bring it to you on the August 13th action meeting agenda. It's not due to the state or by legislation until October 1st. What we try to do each year is to get it approved and published for our community, our parents, as close to the start of school as possible. So we won't make the first day of school, but it'll be the first week of school that we can get that out there, as long as we're okay with the calendar. So if you go ahead a couple slides there, one more. So these are the 5 tables that you will see in the calendar itself. The first 2, I think, are somewhat self-explanatory. I'm going to start with number 3. So on the next slide, you have the required statewide assessments. So there are some legislative requirements that, and the state fills out all of that information in this calendar. Last year was, or this past school year was the first time that these new dates kicked in, so that most of the testing was all during the month of May, like the last 4 weeks of school. And so that's how it will be in the spring of 2020 by statute. The only real leeway the district has in the state testing calendar is in the CBT windows, computer-based testing windows. They give us a window, and so then we can allow schools to figure out what the best testing plan is within that window. And in the PBT, the paper-based testing windows, normally they ask us to choose specific dates. So for example, we have chosen a date for the writing tests across the whole district. Now that being said, sometime this fall, invariably the state will come out with some more guidance that may modify this. And so usually we put in our agenda item that comes before you that you authorize the superintendent to make modifications as necessary as we go through the year. So moving on to the next table 4 are the you could say, optional tests. I mean, these are tests that not all students take. Those are some examples of them on the screen. We do have PSAT testing offered to all of our 10th graders for free in the fall. They don't have to do it, but the majority of them do. Good 90% of them do, yes.
It's been my experience that in Florida, or in this school district, we don't emphasize PSAT the way we used to when I taught for many years in Texas. And I feel that this is doing a real disservice, especially to our really high-level kids, advertising to them that those that score very high as sophomores need to be aware of the opportunities for them as juniors for national merit. And what I'm wondering is, is there anything that we can do to get the word out to the sophomores and not just have them think of this, oh, this is another pain in the neck test that we need to take, especially those that are enrolled in our upper tier advanced classes, and then do something so that we can actually have more than like 2 national merit finalists in the whole district. I mean, to me, it really, as you can see, I'm pretty focused on raising the rigor for our upper level students, and I just wonder what happens to the data, because my experience is from a different state, we would take that sophomore information and we would often find some big surprises of kids that were underachieving in their classrooms, but were, could be doing a whole lot more. So I'm wondering, do we do anything with that data? And, certainly it's important to have, especially all the kids that are in the upper level classes, taking those tests.
And so the inside of the schoolhouse, oftentimes our school counselors, when they visit classes, talk about the various tests the students will be exposed to throughout the course of the year. And they do talk about the importance of taking each of those seriously and why it's important for each. In regards to the PSAT itself, those results then are used within the school counseling department as they start looking at each individual student to see which other courses, high-level rigorous courses, are students predicted that they could do well in. And then when they start scheduling and looking at their 4-year academic plan throughout the course of high school, they used it as one data piece to make individual decisions on students. So I do know that does happen inside of the schoolhouse.
But, yeah, and I realize that piece, but what I'm saying is, are we not doing a disservice to those kids if they don't realize that if they were really high scoring as sophomores, they have great scholarships available to them, and colleges that'll be knocking at their door even more if we encourage them as a district.
I would agree if the students did it. If the students don't know it,
In my
yes.
experience, that's not done in this district, and we have some really, really smart kids that I think need to have better awareness. It's not just a pre-college, a pre-SAT test for what you said. It's
Correct.
offers opportunities that our kids aren't getting.
And so I'll make the commitment to you as well as we develop our future assistant principal for curriculum meetings. I already wrote it down. That'll be a future agenda item that we'll make sure that Ms. Brooks comes in as well and make sure that.
A whole bunch of finalists this year.
That's good.
We can do it.
And
on the list.
I need to move us
Sorry.
along. We're about 15 minutes behind, so if we can.
All right, so the other thing of interest for you would be Table 5. This is our district required assessments. Those are for progress monitoring purposes. And we do some quarterly assessment, kind of wide scale, to keep our fingers on the pulse of how we're progressing during the year. And then this past year, some formative, some more specific brief assessments were introduced for specific grades and subjects. And in our early grades, we do fluency checks, since that is highly correlated with progress in reading. So unless you have some specific questions about our progress monitoring assessments, we can
We did,
move on.
just to note, we did remove fourth quarter progress monitoring assessments because after getting feedback and looking at the data, the teachers didn't have enough time to act on the data.
Right.
So we removed that. So they do end this year, third quarter.
Yes.
Because
We also went to reform the assessment. So last year, schools were required to take it in a certain week or 2-week window, and the feedback from the teachers quarter. So they'll have a formative assessment, but they'll have the full quarter.
And I'm glad to hear that. I've gotten a lot of comments about when we started with all the testing and opting out and all that the statement was they were diminishing or taking away some of our district tests. And a lot of people feel that it didn't really go down that much, and in some instances it increased. So we need to make sure that we get that out there, that we are decreasing that number.
We looked for ways to reduce the testing. We eliminated baseline testing for the majority of students. We're just doing the required amount at this point. And Table 6 actually is where we report the minutes used for testing and how that relates to this 5% limit. And I think you'll find that those percentages are very low, and they're even lower than they were last year. So we have managed to reduce the total amount of testing.
Okay, thank you. Anything
Ms. Patrica.
else?
That is
Okay.
the, Table 6 is the one that helps me the most with my constituents. Because from a 30,000-foot view, I can look on that table and say that our kindergarten students are 0.7% and our 9th, 10th, 11th grade students are appropriately at around the 2% range. So that's super helpful to me each year. Thank you. And I think I ask you for it 12 times each year. So I will try to save it in a place that I remember so that I don't have to ask you again.
No problem. No problem.
Kindergarten students are the only students that will continue to have a baseline, but that's because it's state required for others.
And we did eliminate the progress monitoring for our 11th and 12th graders who have already satisfied their graduation requirements in ELA and Algebra 1. So we reduced it as much as we could.
Any reduction is welcome.
We hear you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
I hate
you.
to cut you off so short, but a wealth of information, and thank you all for what you do. We are running about 15 minutes behind by my calculations. And next, we have the fundamentals of financing. We do have some visitors in the audience. And let me just say this now. We have financing, MMM, capital projects, and the change order. Is there anyone that, if we do run,
I have to leave at noon.
okay, well, there's no voting on it, so I just wanted to let everyone know we may run a few minutes behind. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome. And madam. So now we'll hear about the fundamentals of financing, and Ms. Lecter will introduce our guests.
Yes, thank you. So with us today is Mr. Jerry Ford and Mr. Will Reed. They are our financial advisors, and they're going to speak with you about the financing. But I also wanted to introduce Doug Draper. He is our lead with the Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and they're the lead managers on our underwriters.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Will and I appreciate the opportunity. I will promise that we will not run you further behind. I cannot promise that we will help you catch up.
Anything is helpful.
If you remember, several months ago, we sat down individually and we talked to you about financing methods available to Florida school districts and school districts like yours in particularly, and we went through each one of those and talked about the differences among them. Last April, May, June, the district had thought it was moving forward with a certificate of participation issue to finance the projects you're now considering. That project was held up. During the interim, you passed a sales tax, congratulations. And we helped you look at, earlier this year, the differences between a 10-year sales tax and a 25-year COP issue. That was prior to the legislative session ending, prior to the gifts that Tallahassee always gives you every year for the past many years. And at that time, because we were comparing a 25-year financing with a 10-year sales tax financing, it was pretty obvious what the right route to go was. And that is exactly what we started doing. And we were ready to be in the market sometime around early June, when our friends in Tallahassee allowed us to see the content of Senate Bill 7070. So we're here to talk to you today about why our recommendation is changing and what the path forward is here. And just in general, what we're recommending to you is that the board issue certificates of participation that will be repaid from your sales tax collections, although they're legally available to be paid by any legally available revenues, which includes your local capital outlay, millage. It includes any other legally available revenues you have other than ad valorem millage outside that LCI dollars. It would be paid for from sales taxes fully and completely. The amortization, unlike when we talked about COPS the first time around, would not be for 25 years. It would go out to the same term as a comparable sales tax issue would go out. That means the rate would come down significantly and would be comparable with that of a sales tax issue. The principal amortizations right now, if we were to do the COP today, its final maturity would be August 1 of 2028. The sales tax, if you could do that on your own, would be October 1 of 2028. The reason is your existing COP program is in place. The maturity dates are August 1, and so we're somewhat limited by that. We believe that rather than skewing that and making that different, that it should be in line with the rest of your COPs, and there's a very short difference in time there, and it will not make a difference in your borrowing capacity or your project. The interest differential between the COPs and the sales tax revenue bonds at this point in time is slight. Mr. Draper and his staff have been alongside our team running the analytics on this, seeing what differences there are in interest rates, and they're slight at this time. If you remember, we were talking 3/4 of a point last time we talked about this, at least half a point, maybe more. Right now, we view the difference between the rate on your sales tax bonds, if you could do that, and the rate on COPs as being less than 0.05%. So it's very, very slight. And while that will result in larger debt service over that 9.5-year life of the COPs, it's somewhere between $650,000 and $1.25 million on $100 and some odd million financing. That is a very, very small amount over a 9.5-year period of time. We never like to say that anything is negligible, but the fact is it's small, and when you compare it on a present value basis, the differences are almost non-existent up to about $250,000 over the life of it. So they're very, very tight. I am going to actually get you up on the slides here. So there are some differences, though, as you remember, between a COP and a COP. And let me turn here. One is that COP finance facilities have to be under the board's master lease, and the payments are subject to annual appropriation by the board, which means that legally, under the Supreme Court case that was decided in the Sarasota decision back in 1990, you have to have the ability every year to say, no, I want to continue with this, or I want to walk away. And so you have the ability to do that. You have the ability to say every year as your income comes around, nah, I don't want to do this anymore going forward. What are the consequences of that? Well, the consequences are you walk away from the school that you financed. You leave that with the folks who invested in your certificates of participation. The trustee basically takes control of the facility for the life of the lease on the ground that you built the school on, because you own that ground, and it goes out 5 years longer than the life of the financing itself. But there's another implication here, and that is this is a master lease. So every time you have issued COPs in the past, if those COPs are still outstanding, their projects are still there, and if you walk away from one, you walk away from them all. Oh, wow. So that means that while you have the legal right to do so, You do not have the practical ability to do so. Okay? There are, unlike sales tax revenue bonds where you grant bondholders a legal pledge and a lien on the district's sales tax revenues, you do not do that in a COP issue. Those revenues may pay the debt service, but those revenues aren't pledged to the debt service. What the investor gets is the lease payments that you make over time. Sales tax revenue bonds are frequently issued with a debt service reserve fund, whether that's in the form of cash that you borrow along with the borrowing, or whether it is in the form of a surety bond, another insurance policy that you buy. It's still in there. It's an added cost to a sales tax bond. COPs do not have debt service reserve funds for a number of reasons that I won't bore you with here, but the market has accepted that they can be sold without those reserve funds. And in developing our assumptions, we've assumed that the ratings on your COPs are AA2 by Moody's, AA- by either Fitch or S&P, and that is slightly higher than what we think that the ratings on your sales tax bonds would be, because it is a new sales tax. It doesn't have a history of collections. There are other things involved in that, and so that we think that they would, at least by Moody's, be one notch lower. What are the other differences in a COP financing? Well, from a documentation standpoint, the lawyers would tell you that sales tax revenue bonds are much easier. If you looked at the closing documents, they're about this thick, as opposed to the COPs, which are two volumes about this thick. And every lawyer in the transaction, and by the way, there are 4 separate law firms involved in this transaction. They have all been actively involved in the recommendation that we're making today. Your board counsel, one of his partners, your bond counsel, Greenberg Kraug out of Miami, your disclosure counsel, Neighbors Giblin in Tampa, and underwriters counsel, who represents Doug and Bank of America Merrill Lynch out of Tallahassee. They are the top law firms in the state for this type of financing. Everyone is in agreement as to the proper course of action here today. So why did we get here? Why did we change our recommendation from, there you go, from simply going forward with a straight sales tax transaction and then issuing COPs, which are going to be paid by that same revenue source? What the heck is that all about? Why does that make sense? Because on its face, it does not. But there is a reason, and Will's going to talk to you about that reason.
Yeah. As Jerry alluded to earlier, the major driver for the change in the recommendation has been the passage of Senate Bill 7070. This bill went through and encompassed a wide variety of impacts on your ability to finance construction, but the one that has the most teeth and the one that is impacting our recommendation the most is the fact that it is now enforcing the cost per student station caps set out in 2017. Basically what it goes through and says is that now you cannot use your 1.5 mil millage money for projects that exceed the cost per student station unless those facilities are subject to a lease purchase agreement. They also go through and limit your ability to use any of your other revenues. You cannot use sales tax revenue bonds now for a facility that would exceed the cost per student station. The way that the exception was worded, and this is, I want to preface this by saying that we've been working with, as Jerry mentioned, the 4 different law firms on this transaction. And this analysis is being driven primarily by the lawyers. We are not lawyers, but we try to play one on TV. There is an exception for a facility that would be financed that would be subject to a lease purchase agreement, but would be paid for by revenues that are different than your 1.5 mils. The fact that you folks have gone through and were able to pass a sales tax gives you the ability now to take advantage of that exception in the law and construct a school that does not meet the cost per student station.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yes.
So you're saying that the only way to build a school that's not subject to the per student station limit is with a certificate of participation. That's the only way we can do it.
Correct. You cannot build at PAYGO. If you had the money sitting in the bank, you couldn't go and write a check. You could not use certificate, or you could not use sales tax revenue bonds. You cannot use capital improvement revenue bonds. It has to be subject to a lease purchase, which basically means that it has to be financed through a COP, and that COP has to be paid for by a source of revenue that is different than your 1.5 mils.
So the other thing that you just said is that we also have to have an additional source of revenue.
Correct.
In order to take out the COP to pay for the school that exceeds the.
Without being subject to, there are a whole waterfall of problems, of tripwires in here, and I've got to apologize to your learned board counsel here, because I think the most unfair thing he ever stepped into was, I think, the week after he arrived, us calling his associates and saying, guess what, you're so lucky, we need your opinion as to whether or not we can do X, Y, and Z under 7070. And they said, you have got to be kidding me.
Is there any rationale from the legislature?
Some of the color that we've received is that the exception was an item that came through late in the session. It was primarily drafted by actually the firm serving as underwriters counsel, which is a lot of the reason that they were selected to act as underwriters counsel here. That exception went through a couple of various stages as the bill was working its way through various committees to end up where it is now. But to your point earlier, if you had not passed the sales tax, our understanding, based on all the discussions we've had with all the various law firms that work in this sphere, is that without that sales tax, you would not be able to build a school that did not meet cost per student station.
You would not be able to use the plans and specs that you have worked so hard on.
Okay, but that's where I have a question. We keep, going back to the fact. We keep going back to the fact of exceeding the cost of student station. So, and maybe this is another construction question, but what is the difference in cost where the prototypes that we were building previously did meet that standard, is what I'm understanding. So I'm not sure I can understand when you talk about exceeding the cost per student station, why can't we just be able to build? Obviously, that amount was given, and it's equitable for building a school. So why are we above that, is what I'm asking.
It is the right question. You qualified saying, I'm not sure if this is, no, it is the perfect question.
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is, it's my understanding that not all of your prior construction has come inside the cost per student station. That's a statewide average. So it takes folks like you and Palm Beach, who are in much higher cost areas, and it compares them with Jackson County or with Panama City or Clay County schools. Those are hard comparisons to meet. You, several years ago, came up with a set of common designs. You built your last high school based on those common designs. It's my understanding, and Kelly can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is not a departure from that. This is to maintain your design criteria that you feel from an educational plant facility works for you. Now, do we know that this pathway through 77 is going to remain? No, we don't. We have no idea. So at some point in time, we think that you're going to need to take a hard look at your design criteria and say, yes, we're committed to them, or no, we're not committed to them. If you did that now, in all likelihood, and your construction people can answer this better than I could, but you won't be able to open the school when you want to open it. That's most likely the case. You're going to spend time and money redesigning that school to come within these standards, and you can certainly do that. And then you're going to take two risks associated with that. You're going to take the risk that construction costs are going to continue to go up between now and the time that you actually can let the contract for that redesigned school. and you're going to take the risk that interest rates may or may not go up during that period. What I can tell you is that if you look at the next chart, that interest rates are near historic lows. And so what I've done here is I've shown you where rates were last Friday in this table. I've shown you where rates were in January of this year, when I believe is when we talked last about this. And then I've shown you where the rates were at the end of last July, when we anticipated that we would have closed this financing with a COP. And we're going to issue 9.5-year securities. As you can see, that if you look back to last July compared to today, you're down about 0.9% in interest cost. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm going to take it to elementary level.
Yes, ma'am.
We had a common design that we built several schools on.
Yes, ma'am.
And at the time, was this before 7070, those schools obviously fit within the cost per student station?
No.
Okay, okay, so if they didn't, and that leads me to the next part, if they didn't, we have the sales tax, which should have given us the additional to build the schools at the common design level.
Should have,
Okay.
yes.
Now, the other thing that's happened, though, is that we're building schools at a higher level. We're not using that basic common design.
Can I answer that? Because you're in an area that, first of all, I think that if you look at our construction costs are very competitive statewide. A lot of districts are not meeting that. In fact, I think most don't meet that criteria. However, when we look at our per student station cost, like for Bonita Springs High School, and you compare that to, let's say, our neighbors to the south and our neighbors to the north, we compare very favorably. In other words, we beat those per student station costs. We see these numbers, 23,000 for elementary, 24,000 for middle, and 32,000 for high school, to be very, very difficult if you're going to continue to build athletic facilities, gymnasiums, cafeterias, the labs to the degree that they currently have. You want to have the floor coverings. So you can, for us to meet that particular number, 32,000 per student station, you would have a very scaled down facility in terms of what you're offering. So if you're talking about building like a typical prototype, you could not do that for that figure. Now, I've asked, our team has been looking at, well, what if we redesign the prototype and try to get really cheap? And they really feel that if we were to do that, you're still going to struggle to meet that number, and then you're going to delay your construction time. So they don't even believe that we could do that, even if you totally threw out the current design and started over, because this design has been refined. I mean, I know that Ida Baker, I believe, was the first iteration, and it's been refined over the years. Last design with Bonita Springs, there was a lot of effort that was put into reducing the costs, and I think that will help us certainly moving forward with MMM.
Ms. Giddens, your point is really, really important, so I want to make sure that a couple aspects are clear. I cannot tell you, because I'm not your facilities person, exactly what changes there are in this school versus Bonita Springs. It's my understanding that they're based on the same common design, and those changes are minimal. If that's wrong, somebody needs to let you know.
No, and that's fine, and that's correct.
What has changed is the legislature. The legislature came in and said, no, we're not going to let you do what you were doing before. We're going to place a lot of obstacles in your way that will make it harder for you to do exactly what you did last time and the time before. That's what's happened in this legislation based on the information that we have been given by the plethora of attorneys who have been looking at this.
And what the questions I'm getting from the community are basically, okay, we had a design, we built schools, we realized that there was a gap in that cost of building that school. We got the sales tax, which was said that if we get the sales tax, then we won't have to borrow in order to build schools. That is how everybody, that's what they heard. And that's what they keep saying to me. If we get the sales tax, we don't have to borrow money. So the question then comes, why are we looking to borrow money? And you mentioned about the new text, no history of collection. So the other question is, why won't we wait at least a year to do this if we have the sales tax? So the bottom line question is, well, what is the sales tax for if we still have to borrow money? And what is the difference in using, like, the prototype from Island Coast and all the others? Bonita changed that prototype. So what is the difference if we went back to that original prototype and did whatever changes are necessary, and we have the sales tax to add to that to build those schools?
You're asking about three or four different questions in here.
Sorry.
And no. Don't be sorry at all, because they're all valid questions, and I can't answer all of them. Your facilities people have to answer those design and prototype questions. I can back up and give you history on why borrowing the concept, and this was discussed with each of you when we met with you individually several months ago, and it was discussed earlier this year, right after the sales tax passed, is that the plan was that there would be a single borrowing, and that borrowing would be to jumpstart the program to allow this particular school and the Lehigh renovation and expansion to get done, get it out there so you could get it under contract, and then from that point on, everything else would be pay as you go. We believe that that is a good plan, it's a solid plan. In a perfect world, you'd borrow no money at any time, anywhere, but if you're in a situation where you have to borrow, borrowing it for 9.5 years is a lot cheaper than borrowing it for 25 years. What changed was the legislature enacted a law, or they changed existing law in a way that tied your hands with how you use your sales tax dollars. That's what happened here. We know, based on the legal analysis that we've received, that your folks have, that the team of lawyers have provided, that this pathway works today. We cannot sit here and tell you what we would recommend for the next school and the next school and the next school, because there is simply no certainty with that, because the legislature could come back next year in January and tweak this law again and either open it back up so you can use the sales tax dollars in the way you wanted, or they could tighten them even more so that you couldn't use it through COPs. What we do know is that we can get your contract let, we can get your school out of the ground, and we can get it open in an extraordinarily low interest rate environment with a term that does not exceed the term that you were going to use had you issued sales tax bonds.
And that is for which schools?
That is for?
We're borrowing right now for MMM and Lehigh Addition. Those are the two.
But nothing beyond that.
Yeah, those are the two right now.
Okay, very few schools open at full capacity, as shown by Bonita Springs High School. How might this be changed, what the scenarios you've given us, if new schools have planned expansions? For instance, if we have a school that on day one is going to be at capacity and it's going to have from freshmen to seniors, you're going to need more athletic facilities, which are very expensive. There are plenty of schools that open with, maybe they need 2 gyms, but they open with just 1 because they're not at full capacity. Maybe they don't have juniors and seniors, and so they don't need the field houses till 2 years later. I'm talking about planned. Okay, so if we don't have some of the supplemental add-ons, in other words, I'm not talking about offices, classrooms, needed labs, and some of the have-tos. If we're not talking about those, that would reduce cost per student station, wouldn't it?
Maybe.
And then so I'm just trying to get a feel on, because I'm an advocate right now for planned expansions, to not have, like Bonita Springs High School, a school sitting more than half vacant for over a whole school year, when some of these things might have been planned in for the future. So if we do planned expansions, let's say for 2 years, and there's some of the items that would reduce the cost of student station, would that bring us in under 70/70? And then do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand exactly. I'm smiling because I think it's a great question.
So, because that's one thing as a board that I think we're going to need to consider. So I want to be sure that I have a clear understanding of why or why not we couldn't do planned expansions for schools that are not going to open at 100% capacity, which would be a rarity that a school would do that.
I'm going to take a very broad question, and as I did with Ms. Gittens, I'm going to narrow down my answer, because part of it is within our lane and part of it is not within our lane. First of all, we are problem solvers, as is Mr. Draper out here. If you say, I want to go from here to here, build me a road to get there, I will find a way to finance that road for you, whether or not you needed the road. Okay? That's the issue. I'm not, it's not my job to determine from a policy perspective whether you needed the road. So what's that road? Yes, from a financial standpoint, we can finance in phases. You could let pay-as-you-go take over. You could do all those things incrementally. Here are the things I cannot answer. I cannot answer right now. I'm not an attorney, but we've had a lot of debates about this going on, and there's a list of items that are incorporated in the total cost per student station of the school. Okay? They include athletic facilities. They include other facilities. So the question as to whether or not you could add those later and they wouldn't be considered part of that cost is unclear to us. What I can tell you, sir, you look like you were about to say something. Did you have a comment here?
I'm just listening to you.
Okay.
But I am wondering, to the point that you're making, I don't believe that you can build schools without those required facilities like athletic cafeterias.
No, I'm not talking about that, but you can have.
To his point.
Scalability is what you're talking about.
But if you have freshmen and sophomores only, for instance, you don't need the kind of facilities that you would for varsity teams. You don't need right away, yes, you need locker rooms and that sort of thing. You don't need a field house. You don't need some of the things that a school at full capacity with 4 years of students need. I'm not saying eliminate, don't have a gym, don't have locker rooms. I'm saying maybe there's some things, probably not a full-service auditorium that can put on a show with all the lighting. You don't necessarily need that the first year school is open.
So let's
the fancier the supplements.
Let's draw back in here a second so we don't have.
That's my question.
Did you have another comment?
No, I'm finished.
That's my question with the phases. I want a clear understanding for myself, because if I.
So to the question that you're really asking, I guess that superintendent needs to address the fact that there's a need for the schools now to address, and the facilities, to the point that you're asking. Why can't we?
I'm only asking it from a financial point of view, not whether we need it and not a policy or anything like that. I want a firm grip on financial point of view, because you said we can only have a certain amount for student stations. And in my head, I want to make sure I'm understanding it right, that we can reduce the cost of student stations if we don't, in year one of a school, maybe not till year 3 or 4, add in some of these more expensive items.
I don't know that that is an accurate assumption, okay? I simply don't know.
Can you find out?
We can find out. Your facilities people can find out. But here's what we do know. in that list of things that are included in the cost per student station are all of the items that you put into that school, including athletic facilities, and in that calculation of what your cost was. It's not just the initial contract, it's the contract at the end of the day after the school is complete and all of the change orders are in. So whether or not that would include items that you forego today and add in 2 years from now, I don't know.
Can you get an answer? Because that really makes.
I'm not sure if the lawyers can give a bright line answer. It's a legal question.
I think
but we
when,
will-
But I'd like to see it, and it's going to affect my decision-making on it.
But let me just, if I could, one thought here. When you're doing that, by definition, when you go back up and you open a construction project down the road, you are increasing the cost of the addition.
Right.
And you are bearing any inflationary costs that went on in the construction market, and you are taking interest rate risk should you have to borrow money.
understand that.
So there are trade-offs, and those trade-offs aren't clean.
And let me just say for time factor as well, when the construction and that group comes up with capital, then they will have some of those answers. They're nodding at me, thank you. Okay, so we will get to some of that, some of your answers when they come up. So the bottom line that you're saying, though, is, Mr. Ford, that we have on our plate already several schools to be built, but at this point, because of 70/70, we can't use our tax money that we thought we could use?
In the way that we thought we could use it.
Okay. Still a lot of questions, but anyone else have any other?
I would say this in terms of an advantage, because you do have the half-penny sales tax referendum and the revenue that's coming in, that we're able to at least take advantage of a shorter period of time that we would be borrowing, which reduces the interest rate, reduces the overall debt that you would be incurring, because you're not having to incur or hold a loan for a longer period of time, like a 30-year note. So there is some advantage to it that way. Now, we would like to have been able to do the pay-as-you-go, but if you're looking at building, prototypes, the way that we currently have them structured with giving these buildings the facilities that we have become accustomed to in Lee County, and these are not Taj Mahals by any stretch of the imagination compared to some of the high schools that have been built in this state. These are very economical models. If we're going to continue to do that along our current line, this is, we feel, the best approach. If we do want to consider, changes in configurations, or later on, our facilities team can certainly do that. And as I indicated earlier, we have already been talking about ways that we could reduce costs, if possible, if we were talking about redesigning a prototype.
Well, here's, and I have to go back to East Zone. Right now, our 4 middle schools are over capacity. We have enough students in that gap of overcapacity of those middle schools to open another middle school like now. And that is not even considered in this scenario. We're only considering Lehigh Senior and MMM, which is a high school. So are we going to be back at the same place? Because we need to have a middle school. We need to have elementary schools. They're on the plate to be done. So are we going to have to do this all over again each time if this is only for 2? And I mean, the need is.
Which is traditionally what we've done. We're already in, and we have these plans in the East Zone already in the works. And when the time comes to come forward with a bargaining or a borrowing instrument, we will do so. But we're already way down the pathway in terms of what we're trying to do to open up a middle school and an elementary.
We don't know where you're going to be.
No,
come
and I know
come
you, I
January.
agree with that.
We do know that your total cost of borrowing today on an all-in basis If we were in the market today, it would be under 1.75%.
So if 70/70 stayed as it is right now for the next couple of years, when we're looking to open up the middle school and the high school out there, would we be back in this same situation to be trying to get a cop or
This or
something?
a similar situation. We're also looking at certain construction lines of credit and each year that goes by, your sales tax only goes out to December 31st, 2028. So it gets shorter and shorter and shorter.
Okay.
So you're borrowing money for very short periods of time.
And I do want to add that the state is also looking at the cost per student station because they're hearing this from everyone, not just us. So they are starting to take a look to see if it is legitimate or do they need to change it. So our hope is too that that will change as well, which will then allow us the freedom to not have to do a COPS, that we could meet that per student station cost.
Which sounds like another legislative item for us.
It is.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know what else we can do at this time. Was there another comment? I'm looking at the time. We are right on 12 o'clock. And I do believe the next two items are very important. How can we, is there anyone, I know Ms. Patrica said she has to leave. Is there anyone else that has to leave? Can we continue on?
I can stay till 12:30.
Okay, can we get a consensus to stay at least until 12:30?
Let's go.
Consensus, no, yes?
Yeah, let's just go.
Okay, all right. Anything else then while they're here? Thank you so very, very, very much. And when the smoke clears, I'm sure you will get phone calls from us.
You know, I promised you I wouldn't drag it out any longer, and I didn't keep my promise, so I
No,
apologize.
no, we drug it out of you. Can we take just a quick 5-minute and to regroup, and the next group will come up? Thank you so much.
I guess a bathroom break. You can go to the bathroom for 5 minutes. Go. You're stuck.
I have.
I knew it.
You knew that?
Hi.
And we are moving on to item number 6. Thank you to all those that are staying and giving us a few more minutes. This is important stuff that we're doing today. So, Mr. Rickenbacker, if you can take over on total cost of MMM.
Okay, as usual, I'm going to speed talk, slow me down, ask
There we
the
go.
acronyms as needed.
All right.
As you can see, and I know everybody's looked in the paper, the total project cost estimate for this job is, as we came in. And I first would like to introduce our business partners. We have Suffolk Construction, who's out here, so if you have any more direct questions that I can't answer for you, we can always pull on their abilities, professional abilities. Right now, we're at $98.1 million. As you notice in the top, you'll see a $2.5 million. That was your phase 1 per our new building phase, pre-construction services. That allowed me to engage with the architect, do the entire design over a 12-month period, provide for some permitting and some ancillary legal things and so forth throughout the job. So that is included. I have to report that in the total project cost. And as well as the civil engineers underneath the architect. The actual construction fees, you will see we have a construction cost of $69.7 million. That's in the actual GMP from Suffolk. That is the cost of construction, the physical, labor, and materials to build a school. Above that, you'll see a line item of $11.5 million. That is their fee, their profit, their overhead, insurances, and other ancillary things over and above the cost of the materials and the labor. You will see an owner contingency. This is a Lee County School District contingency. There is a 2% shared contingency already embedded in their GMP. This contingency is for any unknowns, any curriculum changes, any direction changes that the board or the superintendent might ask during the course of the job. In most cases, we return that full amount back to the board, but we have to have something in there. Typically, we have always gone for a 5% contingency, 2% within the GMP shared for project unforeseen conditions, 3% out for district needs only. Okay?
Okay, so that was a question that I had.
Bazinga, we got one away.
Yeah, well, because it was 2% previously.
It still is. 2% is within the construction manager's GMP. That is a shared contingency between the district and the construction manager.
And that is for items that are not in any of these other areas that come up that we may need to pay for.
It could be design issues. It could be bidding issues that we're overseeing. It could be unforeseen conditions. If I run into a ton of coral 4 feet down, that
And you
didn't
have
show
to
in any
pay
of
for
the
that.
geotechnical information, that might be used to pay for that.
What was the contingency for Bonita?
Actually, Bonita was less than ever because they used half of the contingency to support the trailer set out behind Estero Village during the budget crisis. But I want to say the contingency that we had there was like $1 million.
And, okay, so is it ever done that it's just the 2% with the construction manager and not the 1% for us?
It could be, but then you run the risk if you find something that comes up, you now have to go back to the board and get a board approval. And typically that could be a month to 2 month process.
Or we can call a special meeting.
And where do you find the funds? And where do you find the funds?
That's another question. You've already issued your
earmark
COPS and you've already, so it puts you in a precarious position. And in many cases, what has happened is, I know Amy's department, the money we've returned from some of our projects, the unused contingency, has actually been the seed money moving forward. Like they took the seed money from Cape High when we did that in renovation addition. That was the seed money for the Tice Elementary rebuild.
And why is it under contingency? Why does it say it is based on 81.2 instead of 83.6?
Now, now remember, the 83.6 is 3 components. It's got the construction manager's components and it has my component. If you look at the GMP from the construction manager, their total GMP price all in, that's their fee and contingency, is $81,223,943.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Is that?
That's the 11 million
And this,
and the
69.
69.709. Okay, again, that
Okay,
2.4 is strictly LCSD money.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry, keep going.
We're good? Okay. The next is ancillary costs. We have to do, by code, we have to do commissioning, independent commissioning by code. So that's $75,000 represents us engaging with a commissioning agent to perform that function. That's checking our HVAC, our electrical systems, and so forth. Inspections and testing, that's the actual figure that came out of the contract we negotiated for the building official to provide all of the inspections and permitting throughout the course of the job build. You already had their phase 1 fee, which I believe was somewhere around $47,000. That was in the phase 1 to 2.5, which you already approved in phase 1. You have moving expenses, $100,000. I can't say at this point in time whether they're going to use the furniture from the portables and have it shipped over to the school to fulfill that need, or whether they'll keep it with the portables and buy new. But the $100,000 is to move furniture, equipment, and the principal's needs from Lehigh Senior over to the new high school. And again, if you don't need that, that will be returned. Permits and fees, $25,000. That's a parking space for anything I have to do with Southwest Florida Water Management or any of the other entities in terms of permit adjustments. You'll see portables, $1.5 million. That's the cost to deploy, set up, provide access roads, fencing, safety, and security behind Lehigh Senior High School for the new freshman class portables for August of 2020.
Okay, question on that one. Right now, how many portables are at Lehigh Senior?
I believe there's 14.
And the plan is then next year, the freshman class of MMM will be in the portables behind Lehigh Senior.
That is correct.
So if we've already got, what's the total you're going to need for that freshman class? Because if there's 14 already there and set up and being used.
We've got to add a lot, the ones that are still down behind Estero High that made up the Bonita Springs freshman class mobilization will all be brought up to supplement that. So we have.
How many do you need for the freshman class?
It's like 23 to 25. We'll have administration portables,
Right.
we'll have the dining portable, we'll have the food delivery, refrigerators and so forth portable. We took the bathroom portable from there and we sent it to Harns Mar, so I'll need to get another bathroom portable out there for that class. And I believe it's about 4 or 450 are supposed to be there the first year.
But still, if you need 20 and you've already got 14.
Correct.
1.5 mil to set up the difference?
I may have to put a whole new electrical service into that campus to feed these portables. I'm already maxed out. I pulled off that building for a brand new addition off of their existing service. So there's a lot of unknowns. Again, I have to have a parking space.
Right,
Whether
to
I
keep
need a
some
new water
money for
service,
them.
electric service, I gotta cut in a road off the back road because the principal may not want me interfering with the Lehigh Senior High School operation.
So you have to
Especially if
do
they have
another road.
similar start times. Don't know that
I think
yet.
because the word portable, so she's looking at the portable in itself, but it's, everything that goes with it.
You are correct.
No, and I get that part. One quick question then for you on portables, because I've heard different things back and forth. Are we leasing or are we purchasing?
Right now, we own these portables.
Okay, and
Now,
they're
if I
at
have
other
to get a bathroom-
locations.
If I have to get a bathroom portable, I will be leasing a bathroom portable.
Okay, and to actually set up a portable, what is the cost if we already have it?
Okay, I'll give you what we speak to in meetings. The average cost is about $50,000 to $55,000. That's assuming I have water, I have electric, I have data, I have fire alarm capabilities. It's relatively close to the school. We usually can pick up those infrastructures and tie them in quickly. If I have to go back to a road and bring in a new power service, that could be $250,000 right there. If I'm forced, and we haven't gotten to that point, we're getting ready to, we're gonna get through the summer, but we'll meet with the new principal, plus Jackie Corey, plus our transportation people, and we'll lay out, we're gonna hire an architect to design the site. I may have to cut in access roads, add fencing, add parking area for parents, teachers, and students separate from what's out there now. So there's a lot of unknowns, but rest assured, any of that 1.5 that does not get used, again, is credit. That 1.5 is in our money monitoring buckets. So if it doesn't get used, it gets returned back to the district. But it's not everything below this line is not part of the CM's oversight.
Okay.
Instruction manual. Safety, security items, that's all within the GMP. There's two portions of that. We have all the infrastructure and wiring, which is in the GMP from Suffolk Construction. You also have in the FF&E, the IT portion, where Trey and his staff purchase the cameras and all the specialty items that they install once our infrastructure's in place. Surveys and assessments, that's $100,000, and again, that's an allowance for all of our final surveys, all of our certifications of the facility. And again, if we don't utilize all of that, that will come back. We have an unknown with the utilities. I have $450,000 for utilities, electric, water, and gas. Again, that's all predicated on the final fees. In most cases, FP&L provides us all our major power conduit. In most of the jobs we've done for free, we provide all the trenching and the physical installation, and then they come and pull the cable. There's nothing to say that I may not be charged for that, so I have to park an allowance, similar to what happened at Bonita, where Bonita Springs Utility came in with several fees because they're a private utility in order for us to connect into the system. Other ancillary costs, $150,000. Well, embedded in the $150,000 is anything I may need to keep it moving forward, plus the final auditing costs for this project.
Question about the security. So what you have budgeted here, that's TV and the IT kind of things.
Badge swipes.
Now, what about fencing and the physical?
That's
Physical
all.
security, where does that come in?
All of the fencing is in the construction manager's GMP. The reason I put within GMP on that line, they provide all the conduit throughout the building for the badge access points and security cameras. They provide all of the conduit and the wire to that point. In the FF&E is when Trey's people will come out with the physical camera. They'll buy it and put their specialty technicians to hook it up and get it running.
So teachers and students and parents and all that are going to be coming to MMM, to the portables, they'll have a separate entrance and a separate physical security with fences and that kind of thing, so that people can't just walk up to a portable and...
We haven't gotten to that point, but what I
Okay.
can promise you, yes, that campus will be secure just like every other campus, whether it's a separate entrance or not. Once we're done with this summer moving for schools, my team will attack a whole plan, a layout, which we can bring and brief to you guys during our
And like where the
update.
buses come in and all that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, okay,
And that'll be in coordination with our transportation people as well.
okay.
Okay, and the next, mitigation. We actually reduced it. The anticipated mitigation was gonna be $1.3 million. I think you folks were here when I requested that money. We actually got a reduction from the Army Corps. We had to buy some more Panther credits, but at the end of the day, we actually saved money and we only had to spend $919,000. So that's a final actual cost, which again, I have to report in total project costs. So the subtotal for construction costs is $90,163,279. Everything to deal with the site is already within the construction manager's GMP. The dirt, the fill, the storm piping, the asphalt, the paving, the curbs, the street lights, the whole enchilada.
So how do we know if this 90 million is where we're gonna be and not? Okay.
I can speak to the construction manager, will be under contract with their GMP once it's board approved this will be the backup at the action meeting on the 13th. This is their contract. They have to build it per plans and specifications.
So if there's a difference in that, like if it jumps up so many thousands of dollars, is it in the contract then that they're responsible?
Well,
Or is that
you're asking
where
a lot
that
of hypotheticals.
contingency
If the
comes?
architect blew the design, it would be called errors and omissions, and we'd sue the architect. If they didn't get their GMP correct, then we'd have a discussion with them as well. That when they saw that's a guaranteed maximum price.
Right, okay.
So maybe, that's the point where Mr.
Alright.
Williams would have to show his magic, I guess.
Okay.
This is a change order.
Well, change orders all have to be reported to the board and go through the superintendent prior to.
Exactly. Yeah, we know.
My instructions, per the note on the bottom of this sheet, is the total project cost will never be exceeded. And if there was any way that it had to be exceeded, it would be brought to the board as to why, what happened, and the results of that.
And we will be receiving your regular capital updates as to how close we are to this.
Unless I can pawn it off on Kathy, yeah.
I don't care who from, just so we
Scott, there was a question regarding an earlier estimate about this project and an increase that gets us to this number right here.
Oh, sure. Let me start with a little history, and this is part of your capital updates, quickly. This was everything I brought, the 30 and the 50 and the 70, and just the construction costs only. We started out at an estimate of $77,999,000, so called $78 million. Our next station, which was on design development stage in November, we said it was 79.8, so basically 80 million. This is as the drawings get tighter and tighter. We got to the third station on March 7th, when I told you we were at 70%. We were at 80.5 million. And then the final 100% biddable drawings came in at 81,475,115. And they did some creative buyout and actually reduced a few $100,000 from their last 100% bidding stage to the actual GMP value. So the final GMP they're supplying is 81,223,945. So they've been right on the station marks that we've been reporting and monitoring all along. We had a project cost estimate a year ago, around August or September, I believe, when we briefed the board. It was $94 million. Well, and now we're at 98. And you say, well, what are the big factors that could have changed that? Well, we didn't know $1 million worth of mitigation. We didn't know 1.3 million of hardening for a shelter with Lee County. Our FF&E, typically, we gave the schools 5%. IT split 2.5%, furniture, fixtures, and equipment got 2.5%. They're estimating right now for the need 4%. So that's basically $1 million and $1 million per line. So there's your $4 million.
Are we holding anyone's feet to the fire to get any of this shelter hardening back? How are we doing on that? And I think that's on you.
Yeah, we are working with Lee County on that. In fact, we had this discussion that came up in our last capital meeting, and the team has a recommendation for me, which I haven't had a chance to talk to him since then. I think I know what it is, but then once we have that recommendation, we'll share that with the board, and we'll move forward with working with Lee County. The good news is there is a willingness on the part of Lee County's part to share in some of those costs.
And where will that come off of here?
That would go to the budget people, because if there were a check to be sent, it goes over to the budget and finance people, and they work all that magic. My job.
I mean, if the county, gives us some of the hardening money back.
It would come back to the district.
Right, and it comes off of.
How does it reduce the cost?
It will never change this sheet. It will change your final balance sheet. So in other words, Bonita Springs.
Right.
Bonita Springs, I saved $3.6 million on the construction total product cost side of the house. Kelly and her people are doing the final numbers, closing down the project, and there's lines that I don't normally see. That, my 3.6 plus what they have will be the reduction from the 84 million we asked the board for. So I've already told you, 3.6 less 84, we're there, and I'm not sure what the value is, so where that comes in at, we're constantly working towards saving.
All right. Other questions? We can move you quickly on to capital.
Okay.
So we can at least get part of that done real quick.
Okay, our first pictures you see up here are Lehigh Senior High School, and I'm not going to read everything. We are in the throes of getting it done. There's substantial completion. We gave them a change order for the additional work, so there has to be substantially complete in all areas. They had the paving out there. We're cleaning, we're madmen. They actually had meetings with them to try and make up to 2 weeks. They provided another superintendent. We've been averaging 80 to 100 men in labor. We're pulling labor from other projects on weekends to support the area. So it's basically a 6-month construction build. So they're doing some pretty phenomenal things. I think even Kathy coming here saying, I don't know how you do it, the first time we walked last week. We got a great bunch of people who are focused on getting in there, and our mission is to have every child in their seat for start of school and have a great facility for them to work in.
Are you going to have any portable usage, or are you going to be able to have bottoms and seats?
If the numbers based on the 2,500 student seats we were designing to hold true, no, I don't have any. I do not know. I'd have to speak to Dominic to see what the ultimate capacity students are going to be in that school. That's out of my world.
Okay.
So to answer your question is if they need the portables with kids in, they're going to use them, I'm sure. Okay, these are just a couple of elevations right now. We're completing the brick, the paving's going in, the road is going in, most of the interior work. We're just doing the final touches, dropping ceiling tile and layouts. Next slide. This is East Zone Middle School. Right now, we've received 2 estimates. This is at our 30% schematic. You can see our architects estimated $31.1 million construction costs. Yet our construction manager, who actually has drawings and local history, has come up with $46.9. So you should start seeing those 2 bodies at the next station coming closer and closer with their GMP values as we tighten up the drawings and it becomes more scopable.
And capacity of MM?
Right now, it's 1,300, but I want to say 1,235 is the magic number, but for argument's sake, I just say 1,300. I believe it's 1,235 or something.
It's slightly over 12.
Which is the sweet spot, as he likes to call it.
Where we are with that, we're anticipating a construction start hopefully in February. So we have a lot of wood to chop. We have to meet the property owner because it is a private road, and we've got to negotiate, we got to work, we got to come up with, we have to develop that section of asphalt and the utilities to come down to meet that school. Okay. Next slide is MMM High School. We have our DO, so we have reached out to the local community. We're going to do a final briefing to the community and show them the actual school, the off-site road work, the perimeter of the school, and answer any questions they may have now that we're at a point to begin.
And when will that be?
We just reached out today to set up that appointment. We are waiting on the county to approve the development order, which is all the off-site road work, before we had this meeting with them. Again, we've had several meetings with them previous, but we wanted to make sure that all of the permits were in place before we met with them, so we're giving them 100% accurate information. And we've completed our mitigation buyout. The intent is we are going to bring this as an action item for the total project cost to you folks on August 13th. Okay. The construction manager will take a week or so to get their bond and insurance, and the anticipated construction start should be September 1st for this project, MMM, and a completion, I believe, of March 1st of 2021.
Okay.
Okay, next slide. Ida Baker Central Energy Plant. We've finally wrapping up. The completion of phase 1 is done. We are working. We've gone across the street over to, it's a shared energy plant where Ida Baker feeds Gulf Elementary and Gulf Middle. We've already gone through, and as of this week, we fired up the connection into the middle school. So the chillers keep coming in. Everything's working. Kitchen update, spoke with Steve this morning. All of the kitchens are on board. They're finished cleaning, final startup of the fridges and coolers, so we're going to be ready for the school year. That was 5 kitchen projects we did. And the portables. Portables are all in place. They're getting their final inspections. We did have a lightning storm that took out the fire alarm panel at Lehigh, not in the portables, but in the building itself. So maintenance is working on getting that back up, and then I can get my final inspection. So they're all in place for start of school as well.
Okay, and this is the total of additions to portables in East Zone, or are there others?
These are the additions for this year. So you got 4 more that went to Lehigh Middle School, who already had about 12. You had 2 more that went to Okamic, which again had about 8, I believe. And Harns Marsh, I think, already had quite a few, and we added another 5, 1 being a bathroom portable.
Okay. Okay, questions, comments, anyone? I would like to, I've heard different dates, so I'd like to ask the question, opening dates on Lehigh Senior, MMM, and then MM and N and Estero.
I can give that to you. Lehigh Senior, High School addition and renovation, substantial complete, August 2nd, 2019.
Okay. And MMM?
MMM High School, portables opening, August of 2020 behind Lehigh. Hard building opening, substantial completion, March 1st of 2021.
MM and NN?
MM, the same. That would be August of 2021.
And Estero?
Estero right now, we're hoping to do both dual sites, and that's supposed to be August of 2022, substantially complete.
In Franklin Park.
At this point in time, until the state tells us where we are at the Castaldi, I wouldn't be able to.
Same at Cypress.
Same at Cypress. I know there's a need for those schools.
Yeah.
in 23, 24, I believe it is. That's all predicated on the state.
Are we still being hampered in any way by having those extra seats at James Stevens?
Let me take
That's yours.
Good morning. For those who haven't met me yet, I'm Kathy Ebal. I'm your new Executive Director for Facility Planning and Development. The question regarding student stations is, now that we are using our own funding sources, you heard the bad part about 70-70 earlier. The good part about 70-70 is that it has given us some relief from the all funding sources that was put in place by the legislature a few years back. So now that so long as we're using our own funding sources, we no longer have to get state permission to construct student stations, which means that if we have a local need to exceed student stations, we can go do so without receiving, without doing state survey, the spots, either a spot survey or a plant survey. So no, it no longer hampers us, although we are evaluating that campus for other ideas.
Okay.
So.
Questions from anyone else? Comments?
Did you want me just to quickly answer a couple of the questions you had?
Yeah.
Economy of scale. Much cheaper economy to scale to build out at that moment in time, especially with the construction industry increasing on average 14% aggregate for each trade since 2015. And Suffolk had just alerted to us when they presented the GMP. It happened again this year. Worst case coming is tariffs if it occurs, and that's a whole nother story. So you get economy of scale by. That's why you always hear me say, do the dual site, one build. I got the same concrete guy. You're going to get the best numbers for your concrete, your steel, your labor, and just economy of scale. The other thing is, yes, I could cheap these schools out. I can build casework in classrooms with particle board, not the plywood that is in our specifications and the hardware that lasts. I can go back to putting Formica on, so once the water that the kid spills and gets in expands the particle board, and the maintenance. We try to find a happy medium of quality products that'll save on maintenance costs, yet stand the test of time. We made some changes. You'll see it in the change. I know we didn't go over the change order report. It's there, but you'll see a contingency adjustment for hard surfaces instead of particle board tops with Formica on it in the Culinary Academy. It's common sense things that if we have those funds available, it's going to last a lot longer and survive time. So.
There's also a planning reason that you don't want to build in stages in the state of Florida, and that is the cost per student station. The best time to do core facilities, because they have so few student stations associated with them, is when you're building the most number of student classrooms that you can. So because of the cost per student station and because of core facilities not carrying many of any capacity in student stations, you want to build those when you're building your student stations. Otherwise, you're easily to go over your number, because the state doesn't look at it by what type of thing you're building. They just look at it as the number of student stations associated with what you're building.
So the high schools were the only ones where the prototype changed with Benita, and now we're using the same one.
All of our prototypes have to be updated.
Right.
From current code.
Okay, so the first update then will be with the MM and MM.
MMM High School is the first code update. Obviously, we updated it by putting a third floor.
Right.
That is current code. So yes, we could use that for another site should we choose that exact same replication. If for the elementary in the middle, I have to give it to an architect, and we have to update it for current codes and any changes that the curricular side of the house would like to make.
So the cost of that is probably going to go up as well.
You know, the bones are there, and it's a lot cheaper to work with something that has stood the test of time. The reason for the prototype was it engaged a lot of the school-based administration on the ability in the east to secure and manage your school. That's why everything you see we have is like a T or an I, so that people can stand in the center of the hallways and monitor everything that's going on. And that was school and curriculum-based, not construction-based.
And then in terms of security, you remember Benita Springs High School, you split out the auditorium and the cafeteria, whereas with, Ida Baker, you have it all together, and that's so that you could close off the rest of the facility would have the auditorium only open if
That's
you had
correct.
an event of some kind.
And that was a problem we've had in other schools where, because of the means of egress you have to have for fire codes, they were finding kids wandering around our general classroom building, parents unsupervised, it happens. So in this way, they can rent out the facilities without those rental people or district staff, whoever uses it, migrating to other areas that we need to have secured.
And safety and security, though, I mean, just on the surface, looking at one building under one roof as opposed to several roofs, 3 or 4, explain how the separation is safer, especially when we're talking about, you know, single point of entry and all of that. How?
Well, they have a lockdown button, and evidently, when there is an issue, things get
Sections.
secure.
Lock off.
I do not feel comfortable speaking for safety and security. I can tell you that you minimize the impact if you have populations in different areas.
Okay.
That's just me as an engineer, so.
And if you have an after-hours activity, let's say in an auditorium, you can just focus on that auditorium where the rest of the building has been totally
Secure.
locked down, yeah.
And it saves on energy costs. I don't have to wind up all my chillers to feed, cool an entire block structure. I can just fire one chiller up to do the auditorium or the gym or the black box theater or what have you.
Yeah, that used to be my thing when I was a teacher. You have that little thing on the wall that says you can change the temperature. It took me a few years to realize it's not doing anything. You guys are controlling it all, but that's okay.
I'd say with your position now, you can call Bradley Stewart and get that taken care of pretty quick.
Oh, I tried. All right, thank you so much. Anything else from anyone? Closing comments, Ms. Morgan? I'll get to you, Superintendent?
I'm good, thank you.
I'm fine.
Yes? Okay, and I think I am. We have a couple of things that have come up that we need to put on our legislative piece and other issues that I will address and get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you to those of you that stayed. Thank you to those of you out there that stayed. This is important work that we had to do. And I think if nothing else, all hearts clear. Thank you very much.